Good evening and welcome to tonight's coverage from ETV and SC Public Radio of the 2018 elections. I'm Charles Bierbauer. The polls have closed here in South Carolina and are beginning to close across the country in what we call the midterm elections that will significantly determine who controls Congress in Washington and, of course, who controls many of the most important seats of government here in South Carolina. As the results come in, we will spend the next couple of hours looking at what they are and what they mean for South Carolinians. We'll also be getting live reports from around the state. We have Gavin Jackson is at Republican headquarters here in Columbia. Those are the headquarters of Governor Henry McMaster. Across town at Democratic headquarters, Felicia Edie is also here in Columbia, staking out the team there. And down in Charleston, or the most hotly contested of all the congressional districts, Congressional District 1, and Victoria Hanson is standing by down there. We'll have reports from all three of those locations in the course of the evening. We don't have any elections that we are ready to call here, but we're starting to see some numbers coming in, and it's fair to say that some of the national networks have already called Governor Henry McMaster as the likely winner in South Carolina. We'll get more detail on that. Joining me this evening to discuss the results and the implications are, we've kind of rated the political science departments at the State's University. I'm joined by Todd Shaw on my right. Todd is the chair of the political science department at the University of South Carolina, and his counterpart, the chair of College of Charleston, Gibbs Knotts. Gentlemen, let's start with the obvious big election here in South Carolina is for the governor's position. Would any of us be surprised if Henry McMaster were elected? Todd?
No, we wouldn't be. The polls were indicating, from what we at least saw, a fairly sizable lead for the governor, that in many respects, the fact that you'd had a good economy and an incumbent probably was a strong win at his back, as well as the fact that the level of electoral support that President Trump got in this state probably had some good coattails for the governor as well. So it's not surprising in that respect, even though James Smith waged a pretty strong campaign in that respect and did a strong performance in the debates.
Gibbs, before I come to you, I do want to show some numbers that we are now getting. These are on scvotes.org, and they show, even though, again, it's less than 1% reporting, we'll have those numbers as we get them. We'll show them to you. But it indicates that James Smith is polling at about 48% and Henry McMaster at 51%. These are, of course, and I should point this out, Henry McMaster and Pamela Evett, James Smith and Mandy Powers-Norell. The first time we have had a pairing, a ticket. Has that had any significant impact, or are we still following the two leading candidates?
I think you typically, just like when you vote for president or vice president, I think the vice president makes a difference at the margins, but you're mostly voting for the person at the top of the ticket. I think that's the same thing here for governor. People are going in there and likely casting a ballot for McMaster or Smith. I thought the lieutenant governor candidates did a really nice job and brought a lot of good ideas to the campaign, but at the end of the day, I don't think they really swung the election one way or the other.
And as we see these numbers and as we track them, one of the quirks, if you will, I suppose, of the system is when Henry McMaster was elected lieutenant governor 4 years ago, he was not elected on a ticket. He might not have been on a ticket with Nikki Haley, but thanks to Donald Trump and Nikki Haley, he became governor and now is in a position to take a full term. What has Henry McMaster done to deserve it?
Well, I mean, he needs to, tomorrow morning when he writes his thank you notes or sends his thank you tweets, needs to send one to Donald Trump, because Donald Trump making him an incumbent governor by appointing Nikki Haley to the United Nations was huge, to be running as an incumbent governor and not have this not be an open seat. I think McMaster's has been around South Carolina politics forever. I mean, he was the state director for the Jack Kemp campaign back in 1988. McMaster has been a fixture in South Carolina politics. He certainly paid his dues. but he is somebody who, has tried before and not won. It's got to be, if he is successful tonight, the crowning achievement of his career to have been around state politics for so long and to win this seat.
It's a good time for us to check in at McMaster headquarters. ETV's Gavin Jackson is there, Gavin, and I suspect anticipation is growing. Gavin?
Yes, Charles, I'm here at the Columbia Hilton in downtown Columbia, and it is a very festive atmosphere. We got the disco music playing. There's a celebratory feel in the air, as we've already seen several networks have called this race for Governor McMaster and Pamela Evett. However, we are still waiting for the Associated Press to make that race call, and that's what the governor's campaign is also waiting for. So despite some of those early calls, we're still waiting. People are in no rush here. There's been no big celebratory aha moment yet here. People are waiting. There's obviously there's 6 constitutional officers also on the ballot. So we want to see what happens in those races too. Of course, 3 of those races are unopposed, so there will be no surprises there. But there are 6 constitutional statewide offices that are also on the ballot. And those candidates are here tonight too. They'll be celebrating too if history holds correct for them. And we're also going to be watching that constitutional amendment for the superintendent of education and whether the superintendent of education will be appointed by the governor in the future or will remain elected by the voters. I know there's been a lot of anticipation about that constitutional amendment. Past referendums for the Constitution, putting the Adjutant General, even putting Lieutenant Governor into a different position, have gone through very easy. But there's a little worry about this one, so we're going to be staying tuned for that and watch it very closely. So a lot more to happen here in Columbia.
And a lot more that we will get back to you for, Gavin. Thanks very much. Across town here in Columbia, Felicia Edie is at the James Smith and Mandy Powers-Norrell campaign party, I suppose you could call it that. Party one way or another. Felicia, how are things over there?
Good evening. We are at 1208 Washington Street in downtown Columbia, inside the South Carolina Democratic Party headquarters. Doors open here to the public at 6. An hour later, polls close, but already a sizable crowd inside this cozy place on Washington Street. Right now, they're mingling. They're enjoying food. They're enjoying music and bluegrass music. You can hear some cheers in the crowd as well. But a little later tonight. They will be focused on that large screen behind me because that is where we will be watching election returns, and you can see some returns on the screen right now. I had the opportunity earlier in this week to talk with Democratic supporters throughout the Midlands this week, and many of them told me, despite the fact that South Carolina has not elected a Democratic governor in almost 2 decades, they are still optimistic that tonight will be different for the gubernatorial candidate James Smith and his Lieutenant Governor running mate Mandy Powers-Norrell. Also, this is the place where the party's nominee for Secretary of State and State Treasurer Melvin Wittenberg and Rosalind Glenn, respectively, they will also be here tonight, hoping that they will be a part of the potential blue wave that Democrats across the country are hoping they can create these during this midterm on tonight. So as we watch the results, we'll have reactions from folks here. We are live inside the South Carolina Democratic Party headquarters in downtown Columbia. Charles, back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Felicia. And as we mentioned earlier, one of the 7 congressional elections here in South Carolina has gotten the most attention. It's the 1st congressional district, which is centered on Charleston. It's where Mark Sanford had been the congressman. The representative is currently there, but will not be in the race tonight. It's Joe Cunningham and Katie Arrington, the Democrat and the Republican. And the very first numbers that I am seeing in that less than 1% block, where we don't hold too much authority in making any declarations, but it shows them a total of 8 votes apart, less than 1%. But down in Charleston is our opportunity to catch up on what is happening in the 1st Congressional District. Victoria Hanson is there. Victoria, what's the mood?
Hi, Charles. The mood here tonight is excited. We are at the Staybridge Hotel in Mount Pleasant near the Ravenel Bridge. This is where the Republican candidate, Katie Arrington, is holding her campaign watch party tonight. Just across the bridge in the city of Charleston is where her Democratic opponent, of course that's Joe Cunningham, is watching the numbers come in as well. He is a Charleston attorney. She is a state representative from Somerville. And as you mentioned, this is a race that many people are watching across the state tonight. That's because it's definitely captured the attention of Washington. And as you alluded, it made national news back in the summer where Arrington defeated incumbent Mark Sanford with some help from President Trump. You may recall that he tweeted on her behalf and also criticized Mark Sanford in that race. Well, he's been back at it again. This past weekend, he made robocalls that went out to voters across the state, and his son rallied with Katie Arrington and Hilton Head Island just yesterday. Still, there's some speculation this race might be a little closer than anticipated. Cunningham's camp is pointing to the fact that Republicans have poured a lot of money this week into some last-minute campaign ads for Katie Arrington. And also to the key issue of offshore drilling. He has been very good at making the point clear that she, in fact, supported the president in lifting the ban on offshore drilling. And that does not sit well in a district where it's basically made up of coastal communities from Charleston all the way down to Hilton Head Island. In fact, some Republican mayors have decided to endorse Cunningham instead of Arrington just in case. So could there be another upset in this race? Could it be a close one? I think by those early numbers, as you said, not really reliable at this point. But I have a feeling it might be close tonight. We do know that this district has not sent a Democrat to Congress in nearly 40 years. Reporting live from Mount Pleasant, I'm Victoria Hansen. Now back to you.
Thank you, Victoria. Victoria may have the longest night of all of us here this evening on watching that first congressional district race. Also joining us here in the studio, and you'll be hearing from them frequently over the next 2 hours, is a group of young folks who are keeping an eye on social media. We're all very much aware that President Trump is the tweeter-in-chief, among other things, and has certainly changed the demeanor and the impact of social media. So we're joined by University of South Carolina professor of journalism, Kevin Hull, and he has with them two senior USC journalism students, Sabrina Shutters and Grace McKenna. Give us some sense of what you're looking for as you scan the social media screens.
Well, Charles, for sure, you know, these screens have been going nonstop since pretty much all day today. Polls closed at 7 o'clock. They really got buzzing. And then, you know, when McMaster was declared the winner by some networks, not everybody yet, then they really picked up. But, you know, we're seeing a lot of things for sure right away. And Sabrina, let's talk about some of the things that you've been seeing so far on social media.
Well, what I've been seeing mainly over Twitter is a lot of tweets about how big of a voter turnout we've had today, especially how many states have had a high percentage of women voters. So, you know, as some of these tweets are suggesting, could this be the year of the woman? So, you know, states like Florida and Georgia and North Carolina all hit almost 60% of women voters, even in early voting alone. And some of the counties, like those in Georgia, did extend their voting times past 7 o'clock. So we'll have to see what that brings in the next few hours.
Yeah, Grace, how about you? What are you seeing out there?
Absolutely. Definitely some similar things. And like Sabrina was talking about with those extended hours, a lot of people didn't have to wait in line today. So those are going to be the people who are able to vote absentee. We were looking at a tweet earlier from the State Elections Commission showing 230,000 absentee voters in South Carolina. So that's a good portion of our voters that are sending in absentee ballots.
And how about you guys, for kind of our younger voters? Are you seeing a lot of that, kind of the absentee voter among your classmates and maybe you guys?
Definitely. I think it's an easier option for folks who might be out of state. I know at the University of South Carolina, there are a lot of people out of state, so that's pretty much their only option to vote.
And whether it's your only option or not, I think with college students, it's all about ease. So, you know, no one wants to go stand in a line for hours. And to be honest, especially not a young person, doesn't want to go do that. So absentee voting, I think, and early voting in other states, not in South Carolina, but is a good option for younger voters.
Sure, yeah, we saw some lines say, you know, hours and hours of waiting in lines. We have to see, you know, how students, if they really wanted to do that sort of thing. So for sure. So we'll keep it locked on social media all night. Charles, until then, we'll send it back over to you.
Thank you very much. It took me 10 minutes to vote today, but timing is everything in this business. I'm glad you mentioned voter turnout. It's an important aspect. All this past week, we have been hearing, not only here in South Carolina, but across the country, that the turnout looked like it could be even in record territory. A lot because of the what some states call early voting and what in South Carolina is referred to as in-person absentee voting. There are 16 or 17 different reasons why you can vote ahead of time in South Carolina. Gavin Jackson has been looking at voter turnout. Here's his report.
Gubernatorial candidates James Smith and Henry McMaster cast their ballots today, as did millions of South Carolinians. We spoke with several, some before and after they voted. Many said their not so politically active friends and family also voted this year for several reasons.
I've been conservative since 1980. We need people that are going to work across the aisle and not pander to the extreme. And I'm not finding that with the conservatives right now. I'm finding it more on the other side.
I mean, in question that the national level has energized the local level, and I think people are actively participating in the government for good reason. It's our government, and I believe in local rule. I vote for McMaster. I've been a Republican all my life, but more importantly, I'm a conservative. So I just believe in limited government, and government's gotten too big. You know, the state seems to be performing very well. I'm glad to see the roads being repaired for a change.
Yeah, no, I voted for James Smith. He's a very good, kind-hearted man with a good military service career, as well as just an all-around really good person.
Electing the superintendent of education might not be the smartest way to go, so maybe that would be a good change. I just think it's going to be an interesting night. Honestly, in the state of South Carolina, I don't think there are going to be that many surprises. I think nationwide there are going to be some surprises. I think that's going to be really interesting. I think some people are frustrated with the president and the way he conducts himself, and I think some people are just ready for different kinds of change. I really do think it's a bit of both. I think this country is pretty split.
We do know that the request for absentee ballots in South Carolina was in that record territory. We also know that, at least anecdotally, many precincts were reporting heavy turnout, particularly in the morning hours, and as the day proceeded, some precincts had long lines. So, gentlemen, Todd and Gibbs, what do we take away in terms of, regardless of how this election turns out in South Carolina, has it energized the voter going forward? Let's start with you, Gibbs.
I think so, absolutely. I mean, one small caveat to remember is that only about 34% of eligible voters participated in the midterms back in 2014, and so that's a pretty good comparison. One source that I really trust a lot in terms of projections is predicting it's going to be up about 5% in South Carolina. So we're still talking less than 40% of the eligible voters participating, but at least we're going in the right direction. I think these efforts to make voting easier in South Carolina, to do perhaps early voting next time in addition, or maybe instead of absentee voting. I mean, anything we can do to make it easier for people to vote, I think is a good move for our state.
What would it take to institute early voting? The legislature would have to.
The legislature would have to, and you know, it can be a resource issue. Polling places have to be open. It can cost some money, but again, I think that, you know, Republican or Democrat, you know, I want to see politicians that say, look, this is something that is important to democracy. We want to make sure people who are eligible to vote are able to vote. And not everybody, you know, not everybody can go stand in line for 4 hours on election day. Some of the stories we heard today were both encouraging because people are participating, but also a little discouraging because you would think we've got better technology than having somebody stand in line for that long.
We're nowhere near vote by mail like Oregon and some other states.
I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon here.
Todd?
Yeah, you know, I think a really intriguing angle of this also, Charles, is what's the percentage of that increase might be new voters? I mean, I think across, particularly with you see this sort of discussion about this blue wave among Democrats, and we can, when we think about the national elections, sort of the Beto O'Rourke story at the Senate Texas race, but you know, maybe also from the standpoint of James Smith here in South Carolina, what percentage, or do we know of sort of really expanding the electorate as well as sort of those folk who are more likely to be, or who are likely voters, given that they voted in several election cycles?
And it would seem that particularly in a midterm election, yes, we've got a gubernatorial race here, right, but it's not a presidential race.
That's right.
If you can boost the numbers, then logic suggests they will continue to stay on an upward curve.
Yeah.
Right.
Voting's habitual. That's what the research shows. So if you can get a person to go to the polls early in their life, they can develop those habits and they can be a more frequent voter. And so you definitely want to make it just easier and simpler for folks to figure out where to vote and how to vote.
Yeah. And I'd be intrigued to see if you have even just a small increase among younger voters, the group in sort of the generation that's least likely to vote.
Well, we we've seen issues, I think, and we'll get to some of these issues in more detail. I think we've seen issues that do have appeal to younger voters. Certainly some of the things that President Trump has talked about, but also one of the things, education is always on the agenda. We have a referendum on K through 12 education. Our young friends at the other table are interested in higher education. If those issues stay in the forefront, that's going to bring them out, would it not?
Certainly they would, and I think along with education, it's interesting because there's one factor we haven't yet heard, and this would be intriguing nationwide, although I don't know how much it would play here in South Carolina, and that's the issue about young people and gun reform. You know, was there, you know, we particularly will sort of see what impact that might have in a state like Florida. South Carolina, maybe not as much, but certainly young people may be interested. There's, you know, certainly been issues of school violence, and that students.
3 years ago, gun control was an issue in South Carolina.
That's right.
Yes, but not now.
Yeah.
Let's swing back to Gavin Jackson over at McMaster headquarters. I know he's got a guest standing by from the McMaster campaign. I believe it's Carolyn Andrek. Gavin?
Yep, we're here, Charles, right here at Columbia at the Hilton with the Republican Watch Party. I'm joined by Carolyn Andrek. She's spokesperson for the McMaster campaign. Carolyn, it's still early. We have not seen the race been called yet, except for a few networks. What are you guys waiting for? I know you were talking earlier, waiting for the AP to call that. Why is that, and what are we waiting to see happen?
Of course, well, we always wait for the AP to call it. Things are looking great. We're excited. I think the turnout today is a reflection of the enthusiasm we've seen across the state. You were on the bus with us. You saw the crowds that came out for the governor's bus tour. So we're gonna wait for the AP to call it, but we're certainly feeling good right now.
And talk a little bit about that bus tour. What have the past few days been like? You guys have been traversing the state. You've been flying around. You've been on the bus. What have you been seeing, and what was that final push like in South Carolina?
Well, it was great. It was a lot of energy. We did 5 days, 16 stops, a little less than 1,000 miles across the entire state. That's the third bus tour we've done. The governor is at his best and most enthusiastic when he is there riding with the people of this state, talking with them, hearing from them, seeing how they're responding to what he's done. I mean, you know, you've heard us say this 100 times. Ever since he's been governor, 24,000 new jobs, $8 billion in economic investment, more people working than ever before, 3.3% unemployment. That's the lowest in the state's recorded history. These are things people are responding to, and people are excited, and that translates when we're out on the trail, you know, talking to voters, and we're seeing that.
And we were talking about that record turnout. We were seeing lines at polls today. We saw record absentee ballots being cast. Can you guys chalk that up to one party or another? Any indication of what that might mean for either party at this point? What do you guys see in those numbers?
I think everyone realizes what's at stake at this election. And I think just from our perspective, you have a lot of Republicans that are turning out, a lot of Donald Trump Republicans, a lot of traditional Republicans that are coming together because they like what they've seen. They've gotten results. You have the president and the Congress who have passed tax cuts that are giving more people jobs, putting more money back in their pockets, and people want more of that, not less of that. And so that's what people are turning out for on our side. They're excited. They see folks like Bernie Sanders and the cohort of Judiciary Democrats who absolutely excoriated and were inappropriate during the Kavanaugh hearings. And they see that, and that is a threat to what the progress that we've made. And so folks are turning out in record numbers to build on the momentum, both at the national level and here in the state with the progress that the governor's made.
A little bit of both between the national politics and state politics.
I think so, yeah.
And kind of looking at, you know, the national perspective of it, a lot of people were saying they were voting today, I talked to, wanted to see change for a number of reasons, whether it is that rhetoric or whether they're just energized by what's going on nationwide. And what role does President Donald Trump play in this election? Obviously, Henry McMaster and James Smith are the ones on the ballot, but what role did Donald Trump play in this election for you guys?
You know, you saw the president come down and support the governor supported the president, and that relationship is incredibly unique, as I know that you know, and many of the South Carolinians out there know. The governor has a seat at the table. All he has to do is pick up the phone, and he has the ear of the president. That is incredibly unique, and that has already borne fruit for the people of the state. We got $49 million for the port. He is at the table talking to the president about mocks. He is talking about, how we are not going to have offshore drilling on the coast of South Carolina. Any number of those issues, the governor has a seat at the table, and that is so important, and that's not something that would happen with another governor.
And Carolyn, you're obviously his campaign communications director. I have one question about a big issue on the ballot today. That's the constitutional referendum amendment dealing with the appointment of the superintendent of education by the governor instead of elected by the people. What's the governor's position on that, and what is he hoping to see happen tonight?
He's spoken out in support of that constitutional amendment.
We've seen some numbers that show the McMaster's up, but still no raise call yet on TV.
Sure. But on the superintendent of education, we need more accountability, not less, and that's what that change would bring to the position. And the governor has a plan to, consolidate the school districts, put more money in teachers' paychecks, and really make smart reforms so that we can do that. And that's a part of that process by making the superintendent of education accountable to the governor.
Great. Well, that was Carolyn Andreg. She's Governor McMaster's campaign spokesperson. And again, I'm Gavin Jackson at the Republican Watch Party here in Columbia at the Hilton. We're going to send it back to you guys in the studio right now.
And thank you, Gavin. Let's go cross town right away to Thalicia Edie, who also has a guest over at the Democratic Party headquarters for this evening. Thalicia?
Inside the Democratic Party headquarters in downtown Columbia, I'm Thalicia Edie. The crowd continues to grow. They are energized. They are very excited. They are sending up cheers almost about like every 5 minutes. And it's really exciting. One of the supporters, Democratic supporters here in the Midlands with me is Dr. Jennifer Clyburn Reed. And you heard me right. This is a Clyburn. And so you are no stranger to the political life. You grew up with a very politically active father. Your sister is former FCC Commissioner Mignon Clyburn. Tell me about, let's back up a little bit, the road to this moment, this long campaign trail to this moment. What were your thoughts when you saw so many first-time candidates throw their hat into the political ring? What were some of your thoughts?
I was excited. I was very optimistic. For once, we can have candidates to represent and reflect the nature of our country. We are not a one party, a one nationality, a one culture nation. So it was really exciting and optimistic that these people have supported the process and thrown their hats in the ring.
Tonight could be an historic night for South Carolina. It's been almost 2 decades since voters here in South Carolina has elected a Democratic governor. If things turn out in favor for Smith and Mandy Powers Norrell, what are some of the issues that you would want this Democratic governor to target for voters here in the state?
Well, you made mention that it has been 20 years of Republican leadership. And during those 20 years, we have gained last place, next to last place, next to last place in almost every area. We haven't expanded Medicaid, and that cost thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, their health care. So what I would like for Smith and Powers Norrell to do day one is to expand Medicaid and to accept that money so that South Carolina can be covered. The second thing I would like is for them to tackle education. Those rankings have just come out, and we are again at the bottom of the list. Why? We need to have an approach, a directed approach, an aggressive approach to education so that our students, our children, our teachers can thrive in this state.
If Democrats cannot pull out a win in South Carolina again, in your opinion, as a longtime Democrat, as an invested person in the community, I know that you used to have a business in the 29203 area in the Midlands, what should the Democratic Party do to get the votes needed to regain political power here in the Palmetto State?
But before then, we need to gather the troops and talk about how we can partner and collaborate and work together with the parties that is in charge to get things done. Everyone wants a great South Carolina, and right now we are not there. So if we are truly wanting that across the board, we need to work with each other and among ourselves to come up with that plan. Dr. I keep wanting to call your sister's name. You guys look so much alike, but Dr. Clyburn Reed, thank you very, very much for your time. I'm going to let you go back and enjoy this wonderful crowd. Great music, great food. I didn't know I loved bluegrass music that much.
Yes,
but thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We are live at the South Carolina Democratic Party headquarters in downtown Columbia. 1208 Washington Street is where we are, not far from the State House, where many candidates want to call their political home. We'll see as the election returns come in. We'll see if that will be possible for them tonight. Back to you.
Thank you, Felicia. We're still in the realm of what ifs. No one declaring victory, no one conceding at this point, certainly not in the gubernatorial race, and I suspect not in that first congressional district race. We want to go back down to Victoria in Charleston, and Victoria Hanson is standing by. Victoria. Well, she's not standing by. She's out gathering up information. Let's move on then, and in a couple of things. Can I talk to my colleagues here for a second? In those last two interviews, we heard references to Donald Trump, and we heard references to Jim Clyburn, the congressman from South Carolina. Both have a role to play going forward from tonight. Obviously, the president remains the president. Let's talk a little bit about that, and I suspect over the course of the evening we'll talk a lot about that. Donald Trump is, I haven't seen any tweets, we'll have to ask our friends. Donald Trump is probably sitting back watching this, just eager to declare victory. Is this logical that he's going to be able to find a victory no matter what here?
He may find a victory in the really tough battleground or electoral map the Democrats face for the Senate. So on one side, it wouldn't be surprising to see if, in fact, there's maybe a Republican uptick in seats in the Senate. The 538 forecasting agencies has Democrats a 1 in 7 chance. Now, he won't be able to have a complete victory if the Democrats, as is forecasted in just the reverse, take the House. And so I'm sure he's going to cast it as a total victory, but that won't quite be the full story.
In that conversation with Carolyn Anderegg, she made a point of talking about Henry McMaster has the hot line to the White House, as it were, and yet there are issues that separate South Carolinians from the Trump-Washington position. Especially, we keep hearing this offshore drilling aspect of it. So I'm wondering, does the governor really have that hot line?
Well, that's right. I was thinking trade and offshore drilling, both being things where there's a little bit of difference. That was a huge issue, Charles, down in the 1st District. That is probably why this race is as close as it is, because Katie Arrington said that she supported Trump's lifting the ban on offshore drilling. Then she's now said she's very against offshore drilling, but that really helped catapult the campaign of Joe Cunningham. And certainly there's just not too many South Carolinians who want to go to Sullivan's Island, take their family, set up their beach chairs, and look out at oil drilling equipment. So again, that's one of those things that hasn't really panned out yet. Katie Arrington made the same argument down in the 1st District. She'd say, look, Donald Trump will take my phone call. That hasn't necessarily translated into any real big benefits yet.
I wonder if that isn't somewhat of a bogus issue. I used to go to California with Ronald Reagan when he was president, and I was covering the White House. And we'd go to Santa Barbara, and if you're in that neighborhood of central Southern California, you can look out and you can see oil rigs out there. And after a certain point, you sort of don't see them anymore.
Sure. Well, I tell you, I just think, smiling faces, beautiful places, the state motto. Tourism is so, and again, the commitment to the environment and the love of the land, I certainly see that in the Low Country a lot. It's not necessarily a Democratic or Republican thing. It's something that, really brings a lot of people together. There are environmental challenges in the Low Country, but there is that kind of love for the environment. And so, I do believe that people, the opposition to offshore drilling is pretty consistent. Not universal, but I didn't see any public figure saying we ought to really drill, baby, drill, like Sarah Palin said back in her 2010 or 2020.
Talking about Alaska.
That's right, that's right.
where drilling is much more the convention. We'll come back on Clyburn because we need to address that as we start to see the balance of power in Congress. Here's some numbers that we're looking at now in that 1st congressional district. And again, these are very early numbers. but the early showing is that Katie Arrington has about a 4 percentage point, maybe 5 percentage point lead over Joe Cunningham. In absolute numbers, it's about 900 votes. That's the early going there. And then in the governor's race, what we're starting to see is, again, it's Henry McMaster pulling away now by about 6 or 7 percentage points. 53 to 46 are what I'm seeing according to scvotes.org. And as the night progresses, we'll see how these numbers hold up. It's always questionable in the early going is where are the numbers coming from, which districts are we counting, which districts are their strongholds, which ones are their weak ones. Let's swing back to our social media team over across the studio from us, but on camera over there. And can I ask if Donald Trump has tweeted anything yet?
He has not since our 7 o'clock polls closed. Trump has not tweeted once, so I don't know. Well, we'll certainly keep watching. I don't know if he's nervous, if he's excited, or if he's just, maybe somebody took the phone. We'll have to figure it out. So they talked over at the other table a little bit about voter turnout. You know, at my place, I went voter out 10 o'clock this morning. Line was out the door, so it took me a little bit of while. And the one thing I did notice was I was the youngest person there by a lot. You know, the average age of voter was pretty significantly higher than me. So what was kind of Grace, what did you think was kind of the attitude towards younger voters? You know, were they going to get out and vote today?
I think it really depends on what elections you're looking at. So Sabrina and I have the benefit of going to USC and being surrounded by students from lots of different states. So when we're hearing kids talk on campus about get out and vote, you're never really sure who they're talking about. And I think that when you compare the elections in South Carolina to some of these more, you know, national attention grabbing elections, people were not getting quite as excited to vote if they were in-state voters as they were in, say, you know, some kids from Texas or Georgia or Florida.
Right, and you're from Georgia. That was your absentee ballot. So that was, you know, certainly for you, that was a bigger race than, you know, these South Carolina ones didn't have as much meaning for you.
Exactly. I mean, I, of course, was paying attention to those Georgia elections, but, you know, as a young reporter, I'm definitely paying attention to South Carolina elections too. I think we're just seeing that people were getting more excited about the prospect of, you know, those elections, you know, maybe flipping blue as opposed to being traditionally red. I think in Georgia, people thought that was more of a possibility, and so it was drumming up a lot more excitement.
And Sabrina, how about you? What have you heard around campus from potential student voters?
Well, over the past couple of weeks, I just think that young people are essentially the wild card in this election because, you know, there was an NBC News poll actually that said, you know, it showed that only less than a third of millennials and Generation Xers would be voting at all in this election. So, you know, I think that because of that large turnout number, we have to wait to see if it's going to be mostly younger people or if it's going to be, you know, the elder people that were at your precinct. So we'll have to see. And you both were saying earlier when we were talking beforehand that, you know, there's some difficulties that young people have voting, you know, because we don't always know the rules. And Sabrina, you said you kind of got caught up in that a little bit yourself. Exactly. It's so difficult to register to vote and to get out there and vote, knowing what precinct to vote at. I myself could not vote because the address on my driver's license was different than the one on my voter registration card. And I was unaware that there is a deadline to re-register. So I think for younger people, you know, the media, if the media would maybe make it aware that, you know, what the process is to get registered and to vote, I think making voting more simple would help younger voters out a lot. And Grace, you filled out an absentee ballot? I filled out an absentee ballot, and it was the same process I've done in 2016 as well. But I know some of my friends didn't get the chance to fill out their absentee ballot, weren't sure if they were registered to vote. And, you know, it can be a simple Google search, but, you know, we're looking, I think, at a lot of issues in various states with exact match rules and, you know, people getting taken off the voter list and that kind of thing. Obviously, it's a wide range of issues, but there are a lot of college students, I think, that are unaware of those issues, and it's not affecting, you know, their decision to vote or whether they're checking if they're registered, checking what deadline they need to get an absentee ballot by. So who does that fall on? Should that fall on the University of South Carolina, Clemson, whoever, to kind of make sure you guys are informed, or is that South Carolina government, or who should let you know?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it is up to the individual person. But I think we also have to be willing to adjust the way we think about voting in the state and in the United States by how we're changing and how our generation is, changing, how our generation likes to do things. And to be totally honest, that's via the internet. So I think as much of voting that could get done on the internet as possible, whether that's applying for your absentee ballot or finding some way to send it off, that's going to be what brings in millennial voters, is what can you do to make it as easy as possible for them to get registered, check if they're registered, absentee vote, or just vote in general.
Well, there you go, Charles. Voting on the internet. Maybe that's the future. We can log on and vote and look up cat videos on YouTube, however all that works. I don't know. Back to you at the big desk.
Thank you. I'm all for it. Anything that makes it simpler and gets more participation has got to be a good thing. Speaking of participation, we're going to go to Gavin Jackson again at the Republican headquarters because he's got State Republican Chair Drew McKissick with him. Gavin, maybe you can ask about the millennial voters and how the Republicans approach that. Gavin.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Charles, I am joined here with Drew McKissick, who's the chairman of the state GOP. Drew, give us a little idea about what's going on, how Republicans are feeling tonight. We're here at the Hilton in Columbia. It's pretty packed out. What's it like tonight for Republicans?
Well, I think it's going to be a good night. Right now we're looking at returns that are coming in. Voter turnout is through the roof. Absentee voter turnout was through the roof, and this is following right on line with that. We're seeing that everywhere, especially in places where Republicans need to do well. Lexington County, for instance, was huge. Horry County was huge. I had one fellow, a House member in Horry County, call around 1 o'clock, and I think by 1 o'clock, one particular precinct in his district was already ahead of where it was 2 years ago. So it's huge everywhere.
And again, this is a midterm. This is not a presidential election year. What do we attribute this turnout to, in your opinion?
If you had to pick one thing, it would have to be the president. So, obviously people on both sides are engaged and energized. And I think of what you've seen in a lot of ways is almost a nationalization of the elections around the country. And that plays a lot here. Folks want to come out and support the party that supports the president. We got folks on the other side, obviously, who are engaged in turning out. But in a red state like South Carolina, high turnout is good for us.
Sure. And we were just talking, you guys were talking in the studio about this, and wanted me to ask you about millennial voting turnout. What the GOP is doing to reach out to millennial voters, the young voters. Do you guys have any targeted campaigns to get younger voters involved, or what's that look like for the GOP?
Well, in any campaign, you're always targeting your message to key demographics. And that involves a lot of micro-targeting. So you'll have messages that are targeted to different constituencies that are pushed in social media context and other things like that. But we're always doing that. But on a broad scale, our job is to communicate our platform and our issues to people of all demographics: young people, old people, people in the middle, and rich people, poor people. Our conservative principles sell to everybody. But it's just a job of us doing communications. And you have to communicate what we believe in a way that's relevant to the people who are actually hearing the message. And we do that all the time.
We were talking about turnout. That's obviously been a big topic of this election year. Are there any surprises we're expecting, whether it's in the state house races? There's that one state Senate seat up here in Richland County. There's also the first congressional district race, which everyone seems to be paying really keen attention to among all the other congressional races. What are you guys looking at? Any potential surprises, maybe?
Well, I'm not really looking at any surprises, to be honest with you. The most pleasant surprise, hopefully, that we've got an eye on is picking up an additional House seat down in the Low Country. Democratic incumbent there, Patsy Knight, is being challenged by a real sharp young female attorney, Mandy Kimmons, running a good race. And that happens to be in the first congressional district where turnout is really elevated. So we believe that's going to help us down there. And we've already picked up one House seat. Election day is not even over yet because Democrats failed to file a candidate for a seat that a fellow Democrat retired from in Union County. So probably at the end of the day, we'll be up at least 2 House seats here in the State House.
And the State House already has a pretty solid Republican majority, so just really builds in there. But earlier, when everyone was registering to run in March, you guys saw a lot of candidates, and there was all the talk about, a lot of motivation among Democrats to start filing. But like you're saying, some didn't file, and not all the candidates were really up to snuff in some ways.
And as I understand it, they actually did robocalls to try to find candidates to file for the various offices. And, you know, the quality of the candidates they ended up with, I think, is a little bit suspect. And they had an individual who filed to run and was actually nominated by their party for superintendent of education, who turns out was guilty of a felony and had to withdraw from the race. And the candidate they've got running for attorney general has got 2 DUIs and a larceny charge in North Carolina. So that's probably not going to
a lot going on, but I know we want to just really get out of here really quick. But talking about the 1st Congressional District again, obviously it's a close race. Charleston counties, Beaufort counties. What's in play down there? Yeah. Who are those voters and how important is that race?
Well, I mean, anytime you have an open seat, you always want to put everything out on the table you possibly can to hang on to it. So we did. I mean, whether it's RNC got involved, the National Republican Congressional Committee, our state party did. We've got 7 regional victory offices around the state. They're making phone calls. Within the last 2 weeks, we turned them all down to the 1st district because we felt good about everywhere else. We've gone through our complete list down there at least 3 times doing turnout, knocked on all the doors. So, you know, at the end of the day, if we're looking good statewide, we'll probably be good down there.
So any idea when we might see those results finally coming in tonight?
You know, the 1st district is probably going to be the last to come in because, as I understand it, they were still voting there as late as 8 o'clock. So.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Drew McKissick, the SCGOP chairman. I'm Gavin Jackson here at the Republican Watch Party at the Hilton in Columbia.
Thank you, Gavin. This is the time of election night when the campaigns and the parties get their moment in the spotlight because the candidates, not Mr. McMaster and not Mr. Smith, are not ready to talk just yet. We'll hear from them at some point in the evening. But we're still looking at what the campaigns have to say. And over on the Democratic side of town, as it were, they're not terribly far apart geographically here in Columbia. We've got, again, Felicia is with, I believe, Brad Worthen, who's been the communications person for the James Smith campaign. Felicia?
Inside the Democratic headquarters here in downtown Columbia, the crowd continues to grow and they are still very energized. A huge cheer just went up not that long ago. They're watching the huge screen behind me, and as results come in, they see some of their candidates and some of the candidates of their party in other states getting favorable numbers. Standing beside me right now is the communications director for the Smith-Norrell campaign, Brad Worthen. Wow, we've made it to election night. How are you feeling?
Tired, but excited.
I bet you are. Yesterday, the last full day of campaigning, the campaign was still on the trail for the No One Left Behind tour. They were in Anderson County yesterday, making stops there. What was the message they were talking to folks in that area, especially because that area is one that tends to go Republican? What were your candidates saying? In Anderson County yesterday, what was the message they were trying to get out to voters in that area?
You know, in that particular place, we went by a veterans nursing home. And James had some of the members of his team, Team Viper, that served with him in Afghanistan and have come here to support him in this election. And it was a very heartwarming thing. I thought I'd never get him away because once he got started talking to those veterans, it looked like we weren't going to make it to the next stop. But really our message wherever we go is the same. It is about leaving no one behind. It's about building one South Carolina where we're not torn apart by party, by Republicans versus Democrats. Henry McMaster has run a campaign that basically is trying to appeal to his base and running essentially a national campaign based on the partisan talking points that we get out of Washington. This campaign, James Smith's and Mandy Powers-Norrell's campaign, has been about South Carolina. It's been about health care in South Carolina. It's been about education in South Carolina. It's been about all the people who get left behind in our state and caring about them instead of just caring about you and the people like you. And it is an inspiring message. Look at this crowd. Listen to this crowd. The way they cheer at any encouragement. A little while ago, there was a what do you call that thing across the bottom? It's some kind of, yeah, the ticker. There's another name for it, but anyway, that showed us with 51%, 49%, and they went wild. We don't know where it's going to end up. We know that exit polls called it for the opponent before a single vote was counted. That's ridiculous. We came into this day winning. We know that because 325,000 people had voted absentee. That's like double the previous record in a non-presidential year. When that happens, it's good for the challenger. We looked at the demographics, we looked at where the voting was, and there was great enthusiasm. People in this state, a lot of them may identify as Republican and vote for the Republican automatically as a matter of course, but there was no enthusiasm for voting that way, so they weren't coming out early. They weren't in a hurry to vote for Henry McMaster. And our people have been, from the very beginning, tremendously enthusiastic, and hundreds of thousands of them couldn't wait.
We are just days away from a Veterans Day holiday. Do you think that this campaign will pick up a lot from the military community?
Well, you know, James' military service has been very important to him, to his supporters, and to the voters of South Carolina. And it's something that speaks to character. I've never seen anything a more inspiring story than his. Here's a man who, you know, gave up his commission as a lawyer in the National Guard so that he could fight in the infantry. Started over as an enlisted man, went to basic training with 18-year-olds when he was 37 years old. That's why, you know, the guys he served with in Afghanistan are here. It's why wherever he goes, veterans are inspired and want to back this guy. And it's why we continue to hold out hope that we're going to win this tonight.
All right. Communications Director for the Smith-Norrell campaign, Mr. Brad Warthen, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. All right. All right, and back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Felicia. At one of those campaign headquarters, the mood will change as the night goes forward, but so far we're not at that point. The numbers, still in relatively early stages, do show Henry McMaster leading James Smith, but again, it's a question of where the vote's coming from, how far along are we. About 225,000 votes now counted for the governor's office in South Carolina. We've heard repeatedly that the closest race may be that 1st Congressional District down in Charleston, and that's where we go back to Victoria Hanson. Victoria?
That's right. They were just talking about the numbers right now, how slowly they are coming in tonight. But joining me right now is the Republican Party Chair for Charleston County, Larry Kowalski. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for asking me to. This is a very exciting night because there's a huge turnout and it's unprecedented. There was a huge early voting and even unprecedented voting today. So we really don't know what it means yet. It means that the Democratic base was engaged, but the Republican base is very engaged too. So I think we did a good job of getting everybody out, and we don't know what's happening in Beaufort and Dorchester and Berkeley yet. I think the results in Charleston are close, but I think we're 41% of the district vote is in Charleston, which means almost 60% is outside of Charleston. And it's whoever wins the whole thing. It doesn't really matter who wins which county. So it's going to be a long night, and we really won't know until we get all those counties in. But we've held the seat since 1980, so it's a big deal for us to hold this seat.
I was going to say, how important is it for Katie Arrington to win the 1st Congressional District tonight?
Well, I think it's very important for everybody that lives here, because if Cunningham would win, he would help put in the majority of people that Democratic Socialists and everything Republicans are against. So she is a strong fighter for Republican values, so we all are very invested in her winning.
All right, well, do you think it's going to be a close one? Because it sounds so far like it might be.
It's going to be close in Charleston, but honestly, I don't know what's going on. Obviously, I'm losing my voice from politicking so much, but Charleston County as a whole is in play. It used to be Democrat and very heavily Republican, and now we're waiting to see. We have countywide elections for probate judge and register of deeds, and that will really show us if Charleston County is Republican or Democrat. So I'm very anxious about those results too.
Well, we'll buckle up, Larry, for a very long night. I'm afraid it's going to be a long night indeed. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Well, thanks for asking. Take care. Good seeing you again.
Good to see you too. Of course, go enjoy the results, and I'll catch up with you a little bit later on.
Hope to have good news for you later.
Thanks so much, Larry. All right, so that's the latest right now from Katie Arrington's campaign watch party here at the Staybridge Hotel in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. Of course, on the other side of the bridge is where her opponent, the Democrat Joe Cunningham, is holding his watch party as well. We're trying to cover both for you tonight and bring you the very latest. I am Victoria Hanson live for you tonight, and now back to you.
Thank you, Victoria. We do have some updated numbers on the gubernatorial race. James Smith and Mandy Powers-Norrell now running at about 45% of the vote, and Henry McMaster and Pamela Evett running at about 54% of the vote. Again, as I said a moment ago, 225,000 and some votes have already been counted. We will keep an eye on that. It looks, gentlemen, like we're going to be keeping an eye on the Charleston race. Gibbs, you're from Charleston. Right. Drew McKissick said people were still standing in line at the point when the polls were supposed to close. Turnout says what to you? I think the turnout is I think Cunningham has brought some new voters into the district. I think that it's going to be closer than that has been in the past. Remember, this is the same place when Sanford won his seat back. He beat Stephen Colbert's sister, but he won by double figures. Who was a neophyte? Who was a new person, but obviously had name recognition and had a well-financed campaign. Sanford had never lost a race until this last one when Katie Arrington beat him. But again, Larry Kobrowski from the Charleston County GOP is exactly right. The Charleston area went for Hillary Clinton. Charleston County went for Hillary Clinton. It is an area that you've got a lot of young people, you've got a lot of newcomers. Democrats can do well. Joe Riley was the longtime Democratic mayor of Charleston, but there are some surrounding areas that are more Republican. This again, Trump won this district, but Katie Arrington, she aligned herself very closely with Trump. Trump's approval ratings have fallen somewhat. And again, Cunningham worked extremely hard. He raised close to $2 million. He spent a lot of money. You could not turn on the television without seeing an ad from Katie Arrington or Joe Cunningham. Joe Cunningham had the brewery tours, which were kind of, as a way to reach out maybe to some of the younger folks at Charleston. In addition to having all those great restaurants, has a bunch of microbreweries. And so he went to all these different microbreweries and you could go meet Joe Cunningham. So again, a really strong campaign. Ran as a centrist more so, didn't really run as a progressive, ran as a centrist. Whether it'll be enough or not, who knows, but it's closer than you would expect for a district with the number of Republicans in that district. And was very strong on the offshore oil issue. He was very strong against offshore drilling. He had a couple funny commercials, but one, he was like in a wetsuit, treading water, talking about his opposition to offshore drilling. And so he had some pretty fun, had some commercials with his 6-month-old baby that were really cute as well. So, again, he did a good job, ran a strong campaign. He's the type of person who could win that district as it's changing, but again, it's still a district that probably should be in Republican hands. Todd, Mark Sanford did not endorse anybody in this race. What do we think Mark Sanford is doing tonight?
That would be interesting to speculate about. I think in some ways it's really quite intriguing that Sanford got on and President Trump parted ways, and that had some real impact upon the ways in which, Arrington emerged in this race. I think it's also interesting that whereas in one respect we see Arrington embracing Trump, we have at least seen Cunningham distance himself a bit from Nancy Pelosi. And make this sort of centrist argument, as Gibbs is saying, that, and in fact, that might be a smart move in a South Carolina district of this nature, given, in fact, that Pelosi, at least in some of these exit polls, is no more popular and maybe even less popular if we account for name recognition than is President Trump. And so it's interesting as a Democrat to sort of use that as a lightning rod. That might also be an interesting position that one could take as a centrist. And it might be an interesting position that if were Cunningham to win, to join more progressive colleagues and younger colleagues who might also oppose Pelosi as sort of the old guard. So there might be this interesting, not to get ahead of ourselves. Well, that's a whole area of conversation that we've alluded to, because it's partly the Jim Clyburn question, and it's the Nancy Pelosi question, and it's the younger component of the Democratic Party. If, as you suggest, he does indeed pull this race out. I'm just wondering, had Mark Sanford won the primary, this would be a peripheral race in most likelihood. I would think so. And I think, and this is an ongoing the question within the GOP. The Democrats have their own set of internal questions, but is this the party of Trump? We've often heard. And so in some ways, Sanford's loss would bold the argument that it is, that to oppose the president.
Certainly Katie Arrington is very close to, to Trump.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
So is it the party of Trump?
I think it is the party of Trump, and I think, depends on if the Democrats take over the House.
Will we say that when the night is over?
We'll see. If the Democrats take over the House, then the Republicans that are left standing are the ones that are probably, pretty closely aligned to Trump in those very safe Republican districts. And some of those folks who spoke out against Trump may have gotten primaried, or they may end up losing in the end because they were in districts where they felt like they had to speak out against Trump.
I guarantee you we will talk more about the congressional balance in our next hour.
Sure.
We're going to go back to the social media desk, folks.
Charles, thank you so much. The results are starting to come in. I know we haven't called it yet for McMaster, but it certainly online, that seems to be the indication that he is going to win this, back with Sabrina and Grace here. We're starting to see reaction tweets from people, everything from good for you, South Carolina, to I hate you, South Carolina. So it's all over the board based on who you were looking for. Sabrina, what's some of the things you've been seeing on there?
Right. Although there are no tweets from McMaster or Smith yet, we are seeing a mix of tweets from both sides for Smith and McMaster. But for certain outlets are already reporting a win for McMaster, but some people are upset over Twitter. So one of the tweets I'm looking at, one person said that if you voted for McMaster, you voted for party. And that's something we have seen a lot across the board for this election, for the 2016 election. And just also that Smith won most or all of the debates they were in together. So I know there are a few congratulatory tweets for McMaster, but not many yet so far.
Right, so we're still waiting to hear from both candidates, that's for sure. Now, Grace, you were picking up on something else that you saw on social media.
Yeah, so what I was seeing, as opposed to a lot of reaction tweets, was a good amount of tweeting from people saying that they were having issues voting, and that was, not necessarily issues getting to the polls, but issues with the machines when they were there. So saw one tweet from a woman saying that it was practically like she had to hit the machine with a sledgehammer to get her vote to get selected. And I think that's a problem we're seeing. WLTX was reporting earlier today, these machines are old. They're getting old, they need to be recalibrated, or they just need new ones altogether. And that was some frustration that I was really seeing online.
Yeah, I think certainly we saw that a lot today. People seem to be frustrated. They thought they'd cast their ballot for one thing, and on social media, we're seeing a lot of that. I thought I voted for this person, but instead it looks like I voted for this person. What's going on? So, I think that'll be something certainly that we'll keep our eye on, certainly here in the next couple of days. And going back to Trump watch here since 7 o'clock, still has not tweeted since the polls have closed, but I did see a headline on the New York Times, Trump bracing for grim news. So that might be an explanation as to why he's kept off social media so far, Charles.
Well, grim news is a change from fake news, I suspect. We'll see how it comes out there. Want to change directions a little bit here. Molly Spearman is currently the South Carolina Superintendent of Education. She is likely to be the future South Carolina Superintendent of Education because she has only a write-in candidate opposing her. She is, however, likely to be the last elected Superintendent of Education because we were all asked on the ballots today to deal with a referendum that would change the Superintendent of Education's job from an elected position to one appointed by the governor. That's the key referendum being discussed. Molly Spearman is also standing by with Gavin Jackson. Gavin, please say hello to Molly Spearman for us and see how this is shaping up over there.
Yes, Charles, I'm here at the Hilton again at the Republican Party Watch Party. I'm joined by State Superintendent of Education Molly Spearman. And I know you just said that she might be the last state superintendent elected by the electorate, but we just got some information that might not be the case based on turnout and what they're looking like. Superintendent Spearman, tell me a little bit about what you guys are hearing right now about that constitutional amendment that would make the position appointed versus elected.
Well, of course, we worked really hard. I worked with Governor Haley during her term and Governor McMaster. It looks like the votes coming in, the people of South Carolina have finally gotten a chance to voice their opinion on this. This has been debated for 60 years in the State House, so it's good that the people are getting a chance to vote, and we'll go by what they say. The returns that we're getting looks like their folks are saying no. I supported it. I believe that the state superintendent should be appointed, but we'll have to abide by what the people say.
And that's interesting to see that because we have seen constitutional referendums in the past. The Adjutant General is now appointed. Lieutenant Governor is now a running mate position. Why do we think that this one didn't make it across the finish line in a sense? And we don't know officially yet, but why do you think that might be the case?
Vote. Well, I'm not sure. I supported this. It added qualifications. The governor would have to abide by those, and then the person who was appointed would have to be confirmed by the Senate. So I thought there were safety nets there. It would push for a centralized vision. But again, the governor and I, Governor Haley and I work closely together. McMaster and I have worked closely together, and I'm committed to doing that for the next 4 years with the governor to really make sure that our school system is one that we can be proud of and where our students can succeed.
While you're saying you have worked well with the governors, it couldn't always be that case. That might always be the case if the electorate chooses someone that doesn't mesh with the governor. It could be even someone from the opposite party of the governor. Is that a concern? I mean, you guys seem to have your priorities aligned fairly well, but at the end of the day, you guys are in separate houses, essentially.
That's right. Well, you would hope so. Public education is really something that folks should be nonpartisan about. But, you know, you can have different ways to get to the end goal. The end goal is always providing opportunities for every student, no matter where they live in South Carolina, that they can be college, career, and citizenship ready.
And Superintendent Smearman, we were talking about maybe one of the big hangups of that constitutional amendment. Again, we're still waiting for the results there. Is that people want more of an educational requirement for that position, but right now there are no requirements for that position, essentially.
That's true. In fact, even when I decided to run, I thought, well, I better check out and make sure I have all the qualifications. I knew I was prepared for the job, but what did the Constitution require? And lo and behold, it said to be 18 years old and be a registered voter. So I was qualified, but so were other folks who have run for this office with no college experience, no teaching experience. So, you know, hopefully the electorate will take this race very seriously and always really investigate who the candidates are for state superintendent. There are only 12 states now that elect. The others choose to appoint. But again, I'm happy that this was finally on the ballot. It's been argued about since the 1960s. I've got newspaper clippings to prove that. So the people have a chance to speak, and we did our best.
And just kind of wrapping up, if this amendment, if this referendum does fail, it has taken since the 60s for it to go before the voters. Will it take that long again? I mean, it takes a lot to get through the State House.
Well, right. It takes a 2/3 majority, which is almost impossible to get in both houses. But people are committed to this. I would anticipate it will come back up again. That depends on the governor and how he wants to push legislation in the new General Assembly, but I would certainly support it.
Yeah, that was a bill that passed the last day of session, too. So a lot to look at as we're still waiting the results for that constitutional amendment that would make the state superintendent of education an appointed position instead of elected position. Right now, what we're hearing is that it might not pass, but we're still waiting to see those official results. I'm Gavin Jackson from the Republican Watch Party here in Columbia with the state superintendent of education, Molly Spearman.
Thank you, Gavin. That may be the surprise event of the evening, but we'll keep an eye on that. I want to stay while we're talking about some of the statewide elected officials. We'll shift from the superintendent of education to the state treasurer's office. Curtis Loftus is the current state treasurer. I believe he is running for his third term. But over at the Democratic headquarters across town, Rosalind Glenn is the Democratic candidate for state treasurer, and she is with Felicia. Felicia.
Thanks, Charles. We are here at the South Carolina Democratic Party headquarters on Washington Street, and with me is that party's nominee for state treasurer, Rosalind Glenn. How are you? How does it feel? You finally made it to tonight.
It is here. The night is here. We're enjoying the camaraderie of the people being here. The energy that's in this room is really good. I'm excited that we're at the end, and we're just waiting to hear the results.
We are at the end, but I want you to take me back to the beginning. What was going through your mind? What were the things that happened in your life that made you want to run for state treasurer, to take on a two-time incumbent? Where did this ambition come from?
So I'm a South Carolina native. I was born and raised here in South Carolina, and my grandmother used to say something to me when I wasn't acting so becoming. She'd say, "Rosalind, you're better than you're acting." And I believe that South Carolina is better than she is acting, and I felt like because I had the experience and I'm qualified qualified to do the job of treasurer, that I would put my name in the hat, because I think that we need to do some things differently in this state, and that is how I could best use my resources and my experience and my expertise to help South Carolina be her best self.
For those who don't know, you are a financial advisor, over 25 years in that field. What are some of the things, if elected, you also would be the first African American woman to be elected to a statewide position. If elected, not only a historic win, what are some of the things that you would want to implement for South Carolina financially?
Well, first and foremost, the state can only be as healthy as her citizens. And so I would like to maybe implement some type of program where we help the citizens manage their wealth, gain wealth. That's not right now currently a responsibility of the Treasurer's Office, but however, that is one new program that I would like to put forth for us to consider, is to helping the citizens and giving them resources so that they can build wealth, because the state runs by our tax dollars, right? And so we have to figure out how do we build the tax base and make healthy and wealthy citizens so that the state can then be her best self. So that's something that I would do. And then rebuild some of the relationships that I understand have been lost in that Treasurer's Office. The legislature, for whatever reason, had made some decisions to really strip that office of some of its responsibilities. And so I'm hoping that if they get a qualified person back in that office, that they will feel more comfortable and confident in restoring some of those responsibilities to the office to help them make the best decisions for the citizens.
Well, thank you for your time. Good luck tonight. There is one quick question I want to ask you, just really quickly. You are a first-time candidate. We've seen nationally and locally a lot of first-time candidates, a lot of first-time candidates that are minorities, women and minorities. What advice would you give to those watching tonight that say, hey, I want to throw my hat into the ring in 2 years?
At this point, I'm going to say just do it. You know, we've got to do some things differently in this state and in this country. And if you have something that you can add value to that, you just got to do it, because change needs to happen. And so just do it. Just do it.
South Carolina Democratic Party nominee for State Treasurer Rosalind Glenn, thank you very much for your time tonight. I appreciate it. All right, we are live on Washington Street, 1208 Washington Street. This is where the Democrats are heading out on tonight. Back to you.
Thanks, Felicia. I don't want to be the squelch at the party, but at this stage, early numbers, Curtis Loftus is leading Rosalind Glenn by about 55% to 40% on the numbers that we have from scvotes.org. Let's come back to education. How could the three of us as educators not address what Molly Spearman just talked about with Gavin? And while the issue of the superintendent of education pertains to K through 12, and we're all involved in higher education, nonetheless, I was a little surprised. I kind of thought that this would be a referendum that would pass, if not handily, would at least pass. But your thoughts there, Ton?
I don't know, Charles. I think I take a different tack. I don't know if I was surprised, and I guess maybe this is political intuition more than political science right away, which is in some respects certainly the culture of elected local school boards. It may be sort of the equivalent sort of idea that voters went into the booth with. Well, school board members should be accountable to the electorate. Why not the superintendent in that regard? And you could see also how this might divide along both Republican and Democratic lines. There might be ways in which Democratic voters might say, well, if the governor is going to lean Republican, or maybe a Republican, maybe I want the chance to elect. From a Republican standpoint, certainly the idea of still maintaining some degree of control over education. So I can see how it might have cut both ways for across party lines.
Well, I noted that Inez Tenenbaum, who was a Democratic superintendent of education, also was like the current superintendent, like Molly Spearman, supported the referendum. So I had a sense that there was more bipartisanship support for this. Gibbs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have given the opportunity for a governor to talk more about education, to have more accountability. So if a governor is in a debate where you're moderating and brings up education, then we can then hold them accountable because they appoint the person who's the superintendent.
Whereas now we say, but you have no control.
That's right. You have no control. But
That's
this is a very legislatively dominated state. The governor's ranked as one of the weaker governors of all 50 states. And so this would have been, it certainly wouldn't have made a super strong governor in South Carolina, but would have given the governor a little more power, a little more ability to impact things. I mean,
it's what Carol Campbell envisioned.
That's right.
Isn't it?
Being the governor of South Carolina, I mean, congratulations to McMaster if he's able to hold this lead, but it can be a frustrating job because the state legislature has so much control. They really control the purse strings, and it can be difficult to get your vision. You know, you're a cheerleader, you have the bully pulpit, you can help with natural disasters in times of tragedy, but in terms of making a legislative step, we don't think of Nikki Haley as really somebody who says, here's the 10 things she did legislatively. You know, when I think of Nikki Haley and her legacy, it's working to get the flag down and signing that bill. It's leading the state through very difficult storms. But, you know, a long legislative record by a governor in a state like South Carolina is a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and very much to Gibbs' point about sort of that history of legislative supremacy, as we would teach in the political science class, you know, that the legislature really is the central branch of government in South Carolina and sort of remains so. So I can understand from the standpoint of political accountability why a governor and you would want to have appointive powers over a superintendent. And then you could speak to how it might be you could hold the governor accountable in that regard. But again, I think it could cut both ways at the voter level as to why it's still elect.
And apparently it is cutting those votes. I was trying to think whether I had seen, and I can't pin it down, anyone significantly opposed to it, openly promoting it, advertising against it in a way comparable to what we had seen supporters for this, and nothing leaps to my mind. I don't think it was the highest issue on most people's agendas.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't remember anything either. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also that question of political knowledge, when the voter goes into the booth and reads an amendment, what do they understand? I actually at my polling place heard someone ask a poll worker, "Can you explain this?" And they said, "Of course I can't." And so political knowledge might also be an issue.
It's probably one of the most complicated things that we're all confronted by. We may sometimes see a list of names that we don't recognize, but a referendum question can be written in a way that it's the reverse of what it intends to be, although this one was not. It was lengthy. It had a lot of sort of subordinate clauses in it, but it still came down to the point of if you vote yes, it's voting yes for and appointed for changing the Constitution so that the position was appointed. Anything education-wise showing up on social media, folks?
You know, we're seeing everything is on there right now. Some surprise at, you know, the amendment about picking the superintendent and if that was going to be voted or appointed by the governor. So we're still looking to follow that one. What we are seeing is still quiet from the social media accounts of McMaster, Smith, Trump. Those are all still quiet. No one has said anything on those yet. But some other people coming out who are certainly familiar names in the world of politics. Lindsey Graham, one of those. He tweeted just a little bit ago, "Congratulations to my good friend Henry McMaster on winning re-election as governor of South Carolina." So he's obviously called it already. There's a video that goes along with that. So we're starting to see some more people speak up there. And you guys, I know, Sabrina, Grace, you're both seeing some things as well. Sabrina, what have you seen here on social media?
Oh, yes. A lot of more reaction tweets from regular folks. So definitely a lot of change reactions. So one tweet I've seen talks about the last time South Carolina actually had a Democratic governor was in the late 1990s with Jim Hodges. So I do think people are still hopeful for change, and it just shows in these reactions from some of the South Carolinians around the state.
Grace, how about you?
I'm seeing similar things, and also not just that people are hungry for change, but they're pointing out why. I was looking at a tweet earlier today, you know, showing some different rankings from South Carolina where we are struggling, education, healthcare, work environment for teachers. These are some of those things that I think people do really care about. And, you know, now that they're noticing, hey, we're not doing so hot, they want something different.
So let's change gears a little bit. You guys both work for Carolina News, which is our University of South Carolina newscast, airs every day at 4 o'clock all across campus. You guys have been out doing election stories, talking to people. Sabrina, what have you been seeing when you've been talking to students or just our everyday citizens out there when you've been out reporting on stories?
Well, I've seen that there are a lot of those younger people that are also those who are hopeful for change and are willing to do whatever it takes to get that change. So I know that millennials and Generation Xers have decided just to get informed, because of the Trump era, or maybe other reasons, but I see that they are interested in just how important their vote is, and they realize that it can swing these elections. And maybe the midterm elections were not as important today, or in the past, but today they realize that, you know, their vote matters. So.
And Grace, I know you've been doing a bunch of election stories too. What have you seen?
I had the opportunity actually a couple of weeks ago to talk to both the presidents of both the College Democrats and the College Republicans. So those are obviously two voices that are really passionate. And we have the benefit of being in school where, you know, you can hear those kind of voices and you can get, you know, resources from the College Democrats, from the College Republicans. They're out, you know, tabling on the street, like where students walk going to class. So we have a lot of access to that information that I think maybe not every young person does. But I mean, I'm seeing a lot of passion, I think, and a lot of passion surrounding some of our national races. Students, you know, wanting to support candidates that maybe they can't vote for, but, you know, be able to say this person, you know, agrees with my views, this person speaks what I want for the country.
And we've heard the calls, obviously, from Donald Trump, fake news, fake news. When you guys are out reporting, are you getting brushback when you talk to people, even on the student side of things?
I think for us, you know, people understand that we still are student journalists and that we're, you know, just there trying to get through the end of the day, but
just trying to graduate.
Just trying to graduate. But I mean, I haven't been seeing too much of it. I think a lot of that anger tends to get directed at some of the bigger name news networks.
Well, the other day I had the opportunity to interview Representative Joe Wilson, and I interviewed him about a historical preservation effort. And I was fascinated because I tweeted about the interview, and then right after someone tweeted at me saying, you know, why didn't you interview Mandy Powers-Norrell or other Democratic candidates? And I'm thinking, you know, this was not about politics. So I think sometimes even as students we can get pushback.
So we're learning young is what we've learned here, yeah, for sure. And Charles, we're going to keep teaching them at the University of South Carolina, that's for sure. Back to you.
Thank you. And Carolina News not only airs on cable around campus, but you can watch it streaming online. It's on 4 o'clock Monday through Friday. You'll catch Grace and Sabrina there. We've got some updated numbers as they're coming across to us now from scvotes.org. Excuse me. In the governor's race, James Smith is now polling at about 43%, Henry McMaster at 56%, with slightly more than 500,000 votes having been counted. And what we're starting to see is in most of the races across the state, Republicans pulling away. Attorney General, a race we haven't talked about yet, Alan Wilson at 57%, Constance Anastopoulos at 40%, into some of the congressional races. Katie Arrington, 53%, Joe Cunningham, 46%. I won't get into the raw numbers, the actual vote totals, because they're again moving step by step, moment by moment. We're about 20% of the counties reporting in District 2. Joe Wilson at 59%, the same Joe Wilson that Sabrina interviewed. Sean Kerrigan at 39%. He's the Democrat. Jeff Duncan, in the District 3, way ahead, 67% to 31 over Mary Guerin. In the 4th Congressional District, that's an open seat. We don't have any numbers yet. In the 5th Congressional District, this is a rematch between the incumbent Ralph Norman at about 58%, Archie Parnell just below 40%, and the one that swing, well, let's go to the 7th and then backtrack. Robert Williams, the Democrat in the 7th Congressional District, that's down in the Myrtle Beach, Horry County NPD, and he is trailing Tom Rice. The only Democrat in the leads, and substantially so, is Jim Clyburn, the Democrat in the 2nd Congressional District. Over at the Republican headquarters, Gavin Jackson has Curtis Loftus. We talked about the treasurer's race a little bit earlier. Gavin, Curtis Loftus is with you, I believe. Take it away.
Yeah, Charles, I'm actually still here at the Columbia Hilton downtown, where the Republican Party is having their watch party tonight. Again, it's a pretty jubilant atmosphere. Everyone's pretty excited. They're all feeling pretty confident about where things stand. Again, we have not had an AP race call yet for the governor's race. We're still standing by for that. Obviously, polls close at 7 o'clock, and it's 9:20 right now. Some networks have called that race, but again, the McMaster's campaign is waiting for that AP race call, as are we. But right now, I'm joined by Treasurer Curtis Loftus, who appears to be cruising to his third term fairly easy. Treasurer Loftus, tell us about your feelings in your race right now for treasurer.
Well, I feel very fortunate. Being in politics was not in my life plan, and certainly being a three-termer wasn't. But it's exciting, it's an honor. We've done a good job in the treasurer's office, and now that we've spent 2 terms getting the office where it needs to be, I want to spend this last term spreading the financial knowledge and abilities we have across state government. You know, when we save millions of dollars, that's money that gets spent on roads and schools. And so now we've gotten good at it, I want to make sure we do as much of it as we can.
And I know you're not necessarily tied into what the legislature does, but it looks like we might have a surplus this year. It looks like we have additional revenues, obviously, from the Mega Millions winning.
That's right.
Do you have any ideas, obviously, if you had a magic wand, where you would maybe want to see that money spent, if you could?
Well, the highest and best use, of course, is the pension plan. It should go on the pension plan. But we do have a problem with salaries. Teachers don't make enough money, especially in the rural schools. We've got to do something about that. The governor is really focused on jobs, bringing those jobs in, but we have to have an education system that's going to match that. So I think rural education has got to be, for this next 4 years, goal one.
And we heard a lot from Governor McMaster just telling about the economic development numbers, jobs numbers. We heard from the Democrats talking about, us having low rankings in certain statuses. Where do you see South Carolina fiscally as it stands right now? Are we in good shape? Are we in better shape than some states? Where do we stand in South Carolina?
We're in a lot better shape than most states. It's amazing. I go to my National Association of State Treasurers conferences, and you wouldn't believe the cutbacks and emergency sessions all around the country. South Carolina is a conservative state, and we need to keep that conservatism, but it is time for us now to invest in the future. We've run our debt way down. We're really, in some ways, under-debted. That's hard for a conservative like me to say. But it's like the guy who owns $1 million house. It's okay if he's got a small mortgage. We run a big enterprise. We need to be able to finance our roads, our rural education, rural health care, those kind of projects. So next year, I think you'll see the General Assembly pass a bill, and I think that's all right. What I'm going to be working on is make sure it's not just a Christmas tree they light up. It's really targeted, that we use that money to really improve people's lives, not just for political patronage.
And do we need, again, we're going to have likely surplus next year in the state budget. We're going to have additional money coming from the Mega Millions winner. But some say we probably do need a borrowing bill because we do have a lot of that debt payments have rolled off over the years. Do we need a borrowing bill? Is that hard to sell in a year like next year?
I think I can understand and think it would be prudent for us to have a bond bill, but I don't think it's prudent for us just to hand out money to the universities. The universities are just out of control. I've studied them a lot. Of course, they're all our friends. We know them well, but it costs too much to go to college. You realize you can send your kid to Germany as an American student and they'll go to college for free? And I'm not saying we need to have free schools. I'm a good conservative, but the cost of college is just too much. We've got to cut it back, and we need to make them prioritize. We got to cut that stipend off of them. But as far as the bond bill, there's a lot of things we can do that will bring down the cost of government. Rural education, rural health care, and of course we're working on the infrastructure.
Yeah, we'll see a lot more of that in January. The crowd here is applauding because we just saw some numbers for Governor McMaster, who's at 56%, James Smith at 44%. Again, no one's calling that race yet. We're not calling it. The Associated Press isn't calling it. But stay tuned because that is the top race we're watching. But there are other constitutional officers like Treasurer Loftus, who's with me, that are on the ballot that we're watching to see what happens. So I'm Gavin Jackson here at the Republican Watch Party in downtown Columbia.
Thank you, Gavin. A measure of wincing around this table when Mr. Loftus said the universities are out of control. Mr. Loftus, however, is in control, it would appear, with now more than 500,000 votes counted. He is leading Rosalind Glenn by approximately 58% to 38%. We're going to shift over again to Democratic headquarters, where Felicia again has another guest. Not someone who is running for anything at this particular moment, but it's Columbia Mayor Steve Benjamin. Felicia. Well, we're not there. Let's pick up here. Something I promised we would get back to while we have the moment, and we've just gone through the congressional races, and the only Democrat leading is Jim Clyburn. If the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives. Jim Clyburn is in a significant position. He's currently the third-ranking Democrat. There is a measure, you talked about it before, of discontent among the Democrats in the House as to what their leadership should be. So where do you see Jim Clyburn?
This will be interesting. I think Representative Clyburn has indicated that he may have some interest in the speakership, but he hasn't said it very loudly at all. And I think it would be intriguing for him to throw his hat into the ring. Certainly he and Pelosi have been very close lately.
He's got his hat in his hand. He's ready to throw it into the ring if Pelosi doesn't have the votes.
If Pelosi doesn't have the votes. And I think it would be interesting for him to throw his hat in the ring. Certainly he is a fairly formidable legislator in his own rights, particularly, of course, during the Obama era when the Democrats held the House. But I think the other question is, if in fact you see a emerging coalition of progressive Democrats who are elected in this so-called blue wave, if it materializes, will they be subtly or not so subtly in opposition to him throwing his hat in the ring relative to Nancy Pelosi? Possibly. It's hard to say because, of course, we don't know exactly what those dynamics of that race will turn out. But we shouldn't discount Nancy Pelosi, though.
We won't know. We should not discount Nancy Pelosi.
That's right.
And we won't know that probably into the wee small hours, and we'll be gone by that time. But Gibbs, it certainly would be good for South Carolina.
It'd be great
if
for
Jim
South
Clyburn
Carolina.
were the speaker.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
On the other hand, there's a generational
That's
question
exactly right.
here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think Clyburn, it would be great for South Carolina. He certainly paid his dues. He's an icon. It would be wonderful to see him in that position. But I tell you, he does not represent the future of the Democratic Party. He would not necessarily be someone who would carry the party many, many decades into the future. So, he could be a placeholder. He could be somebody who comes in for a while as the Democrats sort things out. He certainly has the experience. But again, not necessarily somebody, if we get that huge wave of newcomers coming in, they may try to go in a different direction. Same kind of thing for Democrats. Is it going to be Joe Biden running for president, or is it going to be some new person, some fresh blood?
Washington used to be a place where you paid your dues and you rose through the ranks, and then it became your turn.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But a lot of that has gone by the board, really in sort of the last 20 years. If you think back to 1994 when Newt Gingrich became speaker and you had this Republican revolution, you can probably trace it back farther, but that's one of the demarcation points. And then the Trump revolution.
Well, but Barack Obama wasn't even finished with the Senate term and gets elected president. So people are much quicker to run for these big offices and take these leadership positions.
Lindsey Graham used to say, I'm not going to wait my turn to speak up. I'm not going to be here 30 years as some of his predecessors were.
Although he might be here. He's on schedule to be here for 30 years.
But he has spoken up from day one. He's not running for any of these positions. So is this Clyburn's swan song?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, I think it would be a great way to end. People. Strom Thurmond stayed in until he was 100, so people in this state can stay in the Congress for a long time. But my sense is he has no desire to challenge Pelosi directly. But again, those exit poll numbers didn't look great for Pelosi. It could be a situation where she ends up not having the support. The Democrats want to go in a different direction. Somebody who can maybe better communicate with Trump or better communicate with the media. And if so, they could either come around a new person, or perhaps Clyburn is the person in the number 3 position who could get the votes to do it, because it's about getting the votes of your caucus.
Since we're talking about congressional races, let's go back to the one that's had our attention much of the evening. That's the 1st congressional district down in and around Charleston, but not exclusively Charleston, as we've been talking about here. And Victoria Hanson, bring us up to date.
Well, the latest from here, Charles, tonight is that I'm at Katie Arrington's campaign headquarters in Mount Pleasant, her election night watch party, I should say, rather. And suddenly it's got extremely crowded. There have been a lot of cheers, but not necessarily from results to her race. Those have been slow to come in. In fact, a host that's kind of keeping this thing going while we wait for the results, basically said they've been slow to come in and that there were still people voting in Charleston, in West Ashley specifically, just about an hour ago. The latest results I have show that she has a slight lead, but again, we're not getting steady results. We're just not exactly sure where this race stands. The cheers have been to the other national races that they are watching on a national network right now, but it has gotten very crowded here. There is a sense of excitement, I can tell you that. But right now, it still seems like this race could be very close and could be very late into the evening. Charles, back to you.
All right, pace yourself down there in Charleston. We're going to go back now to the Democrats. We got a little technical trouble there. But Felicia, if you've still got Steve Benjamin standing by, what's his take?
Thank you, Charles. Yeah, we're here at the South Carolina Democratic Party headquarters, 1208 Washington Street. And here with me is Columbia Mayor Steve Benjamin. Very exciting night. We hear the cheers when people are watching the returns on the large screen behind us. What are your thoughts about the work that the Democratic Party and their candidates have done leading up to tonight?
Sure. You know, the energy that we've seen over the last several months, the energy we saw in the early vote numbers, and certainly polling lines out the doors everywhere across the state. It's good. I mean, not only I think is it good for the party, I think it's good for democracy. When people participate, they come out and vote, they learn about the issues, and they make sure their voices are heard. We get past the early polls and the prognosticators and the talking heads, and people just participate and exercise in this very precious franchise. And I feel good about things, so we'll have to see how the voters felt, after the day's over. But as long as voter turnout's up, particularly in an off year, then it's encouraging.
Democrats across the country have been expecting or hoping that they could create what we've been hearing as the blue wave. And here in South Carolina, we've had, the party has had some wonderful candidates or some wonderful nominees. If they do not pull out wins tonight, what do you think the party needs to do to get their message out to would-be voters and to regain some of the political power here in South Carolina?
Sure, I'm looking forward to analyzing the data and seeing not just the trend lines in the governor's race and other statewide races, but how the 5th Congressional District and the 1st Congressional District races when we had two very competitive races for the U.S. House, and certainly obviously looking at several local races as well. I firmly believe that people who articulate ideas, holding closely to their values, but also create an environment in which you're forcing people to come together and focus on issues that are of common interest to all South Carolinians, all Americans, then we'll start winning more elections.
Columbia Mayor Steve Benjamin, thank you very much for your time on this evening. Thank you. All right, thank you, and back to you in the studio.
Thank you. That was an awfully red jacket for a blue wave over at Democratic headquarters. We've got a minute or so here. Are we still thinking blue wave at this point? I know you're scanning some of the results that are coming in nationally. What Gibbs? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think
I haven't had a moment.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's still going to be a blue ripple. Maybe it sounds like there are likely. Some networks are now projecting, the ones that typically are jumping the gun a little bit tonight, are projecting that Democrats will end up being in control of the House of Representatives. So it might be Speaker Pelosi, Speaker Clyburn, or Speaker, we don't know quite yet, individual out there. But we just don't know, is that going to be a 20-seat lead? Is it going to be a 30-seat lead? There's a lot of seats out in California. That's a big state. None of those are showing up on totals that I've seen yet. And so
they haven't even closed the polls.
They haven't even closed the polls yet. So keep in mind, there's going to be a big chunk of seats in California that come in. But again,
recollection is there are at least 10 contested seats that they're looking at as possibly changing into the Democratic column there.
That's right.
Yeah. We are now hearing that the Associated Press has in fact called the South Carolina gubernatorial race for incumbent Governor Henry McMaster over James Smith. And while that has appeared to be something that was going to happen from the early returns, now the Associated Press, and we go by their calls on this, is calling for Henry McMaster, this time elected governor. He ascended to the position after having been elected lieutenant governor when Nikki Haley left the office. Governor McMaster stepped up to be governor. He's now got, looks like, 4 years ahead of him in full control. Not a huge surprise, but what does that mean for Henry McMaster? What can he do with that?
Well, I think particularly given a growing economy in South Carolina, he can and the prospect of a budget surplus, he could make an argument at least, and we just heard Loftus make the case. He could at least make a case about sort of targeted increases in questions around education. And I know there will be the debate about what should be the or what should be the policy relative to higher education in terms of tuition increases and these questions. But I think he could say, well, around infrastructure, around sort of education, he could make a conservative case for moving forward on those things and not break the bank from one standpoint.
Well, we heard Curtis Loftus talk about a bond bill,
That's right.
which the institutions of higher education have long been calling for and urging the legislature to provide, which would pick up some of the massive amounts of deferred maintenance and some of the infrastructure that needs to be restored. There's an arguable case if the state treasurer is calling for it. Would the legislature go for that?
I mean, interest rates aren't as low as they were, but they're still historically fairly low. And so, again, North Carolina had a bond bill even with the Republican legislature up there. So it certainly is possible. And you're exactly right. There's a lot of deferred maintenance. There's a lot of infrastructure projects and a lot of state property, a lot of higher ed that could really benefit from that type of investment.
Anything that you've heard Governor McMaster say along the trail and in all those debates that now he really has the mandate to say, we're going to do this?
I expect him to continue to focus on bringing companies to South Carolina, keeping taxes low, working on recruiting businesses from all around the world, making it a business-friendly environment. I certainly hope, locally again, down in Charleston, we've got some major traffic issues. The completion of I-526 is something that's been in a holding pattern for quite a while. It was something that people were pretty split on. The tide has shifted a little bit in Charleston. I think the bulk of folks want to see something done down there given the people that have moved down there. So it'll be interesting to see if he can push the DOT forward a little bit.
I want to go back to Sabrina and Grace and Kevin, and I know the Twitter feeds have been clicking on Henry McMaster all along, but has it picked up?
It has picked up. The chatter certainly has picked up, that's for sure, but still nothing from either of the two candidates, which, I think, maybe now that it's been declared by the AP, maybe we'll see a tweet from either one of them to kind of get that going. And, obviously we all have election fever here, but what we're finding on social media is not everybody does. Josh Kendall at the State covers Gamecock football, and he tweeted earlier today in a press conference, "Me to Will Muschamp, have you addressed voting with your team? Muschamp, no response. Me, there's election today? Muschamp, I do now." Getting ready for Florida. So while we obviously have big election fever, as we said, doesn't seem like everybody does. I want to talk about something else real quick, though. Over 250 females are running for office today. And, we saw some tweets earlier about how this is one of the greatest numbers ever of women running for office. And what does that mean to you guys, as young females starting to enter the working world and starting your careers, to hear the number of women running for office? Sabrina, what does that mean to you?
Well, first off, it is being tweeted that Marsha Blackburn has been elected as the first female U.S. Senator from Tennessee, so that's pretty awesome. But as far as myself, this means that being a female in general won't hold me back, and I can just be whatever I choose to be. And even though in 2016 Hillary lost, it still is a significant stride that she even got as far as she did. So to me, that means I can get as far as she did, So I do think that the amount of power that women have now does resonate with a lot of women. And I think it's showing in the polls. So I think women have found their voice and they intend to use it.
Grace, what do you think?
Yeah, I think for me, it's more an issue of representation. So if we look at, the makeup of our Congress, it's not representative of the country. Women make up 51% of the country, but not 51% of the Congress. And you can get down into, even more brass tacks about African American women, Hispanic women, what percentages those make up. So I think it really speaks volumes that we're nominating more women, electing more women, pushing to have more representation for women who are just going to be able to better understand women's issues.
And I think, for you guys, you've kind of grown up, with the attitude that women could do anything and could be anything. You think about older generations, maybe that wasn't necessarily the case. I always think about my grandmother, when her mailman became a mail lady. That was the biggest thrill in my grandma's life, that the mailman could be a woman now. So when you think about maybe your parents, your mom, your grandma, I know your great aunt lives here in Columbia, you know, when you talk to older generations of women in your family, what's their attitude towards all this, Grace?
I think in my family, at least, it was always the idea of not seeing it, not as a possibility, but knowing that it was doubtful. So, you know, throughout the 2016 election, you know, I think some of the older members of my family were a little bit more surprised that, you know, a woman was even able to get that nomination.
So we've got some strong women here, that's for sure. Grace McKenna, Sabrina Shutters. Charles, back to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Grace and Sabrina as well. If the numbers hold up, gentlemen, in that first district, and Katie Arrington is leading, we could have a South Carolina female member of Congress. We're scratching our heads trying to think if there has been one in that regard. Obviously, we've had a female governor. And then the other thing that Sabrina pointed out is the call in Tennessee on Blackburn. That's one of the key seats that the Republicans wanted to hold because this was Corker's seat and he was leaving the Senate, and that really would help the Republicans hold the Senate.
That's right.
Is that where we're headed?
That's where it looks like. And again, the Democrats ran Phil Bredesen, a very popular governor, a centrist, somebody who Democrats thought might do pretty well.
And a septuagenarian.
Right, but it did not. He was not able to. He was not able. Does not look like he was able to win that state.
It also looks like that the Republicans may have taken a Democratic Senate seat in Indiana.
And this was the seat Taylor Swift got involved in Tennessee, and tried to get folks to support Phil Bredesen, and it just apparently wasn't enough.
Yeah, it would be an interesting contrast in terms of if we see sort of an interesting uptick in the number of women elected to Congress and various other offices. Partly because one might attribute some of the Donnelly defeat, as it holds to the whole controversy around the Kavanaugh nomination.
Donnelly being the Democrat
from Indiana, who in effect, in terms of the whole sort of question about confirming or not confirming Kavanaugh around these allegations. So it'll be interesting as to how was there in fact a ripple effect from that particular Supreme Court controversy in terms of nomination.
There are more of those races to come, and we haven't heard anything about Florida or Georgia, which are both in terms of the Senate races and the governor's races. In those two states are the ones, and of course the Texas Senate race. Those are all out there. The Nationals and PBS, when it takes over from us a little later this evening, will certainly have word on that. We've got Alan Wilson, who is the candidate for Attorney General. He is the incumbent, and he is standing by with Gavin Jackson. Gavin.
Yeah, here we are. We're actually we're here at the Republican Watch Party in Columbia. I'm with Attorney General Alan Wilson, who's on the ballot tonight, and we're still seeing those results come in. We're seeing a lot of victory speeches so far. Republican Joe Wilson, Representative Joe Wilson, your father's on stage. Tell us a little about what's going on right here at the Republican Watch Party, Attorney General Alan Wilson.
Right now, there's a feeling of elation. Everyone's very excited. The results are coming in. We're feeling really confident about our numbers. I was just really proud to stand on the stage with Dad. He announced his victory tonight. I think the last number I saw was close to 60%, so I'm feeling really good about his election. I'm feeling really good about our election.
Where are you guys stand right now? We've been kind of running around. What are your numbers looking like? You're running against, you're an incumbent, you're running against Democrat Concession. What are your numbers looking like right now? Your race hasn't been called yet, if I'm correct.
It's been about 20 minutes since I looked, but last I looked I was up 57% with about 40-something% reporting. So, I mean, the numbers are looking really good. We feel like it's going to be a good night. I don't want to say anything yet, but like I said, it's kind of hard to, those numbers are starting to bake in a little bit.
And Attorney General Wilson, what are some of your priorities for this office of Attorney General? We saw that October was Domestic Violence Awareness Month. You had your silent witness ceremony, your annual ceremony, discussing the victims that have died from domestic violence in the past year. South Carolina still is ranking in the top 10 as it has been for years. That's a top priority for you. Tell us a little bit about what you guys are trying to see done there. Obviously, it's an issue that's still very much on the South Carolina.
It's absolutely a major issue. I think we were ranked 6th in the country on women killed by their domestic male partners, and that is an unacceptable number, but 3 years ago we were ranked number 1. Again, far from where we want to be. We're in the right direction, but I attribute a lot of this to the men and women in the various prosecutor and law enforcement agencies. We've got a new law out there that we've reformed how we prosecute and investigate domestic violence, but it's got to be more than just attacking the crime. We've got to go to the cause of the crime. Batters treatment programs. We got to get into the schools and educate young people on what is appropriate and inappropriate conduct in the home. A lot of these kids don't ever get challenged until they're 15, 16, 17 years old on what is appropriate conduct. So we got to continue to work on that.
Well, we did see those reforms in 2015 going through, but is it more than just regulatory approach to this? I mean, how do you tackle maybe some of that mindset, some of the culture? How do we kind of get through a lot of that besides just passing tougher laws?
No, well, that's exactly what I was saying, and I agree with you. You can pass a law and enforce a law, but that's dealing with the symptom, not the cause. The cause is dealing with young people growing up in homes where they see violence, and then they grow up and they're more likely to become a batterer or a victim of battery because that's normal to them. And so breaking that notion of normal is what I want to do by educating, working with Molly Spearman and local school superintendents on getting age-appropriate curriculum in the classrooms is what I really want to focus on.
And just looking at the Republican Party as a whole in South Carolina, there's all this discussion about blue waves happening across the country. Looks like a lot of these races are really close. What's your feelings on the state of the Republican Party in South Carolina right now? Is it going to stay solidly red for the foreseeable future, in your opinion?
Listen, I believe South Carolina is a solid red state, but it's not going to remain that way if we rest on our laurels and we don't produce results. And so I really believe that we have an opportunity in front of us right now. And if we do our jobs, then yes, South Carolina will remain solidly red. If we don't do our jobs, the people will fire us. It's that simple.
And Governor McMaster, of course, was declared winner by the Associated Press just moments ago. You know Governor McMaster very well. You've worked with him, obviously. He's been leading the state for the past 2 years. Now he's been elected to a full term. If you're back in office, what's it going to be like to work with the governor for the next 4 years?
Well, I worked for the governor when he was the Attorney General. And what I love about him being governor now is that having been a former Attorney General, he really understands what the Attorney General's office can do for the governor's office because he was in that role. And so now I'm proud of the fact that he is going to be able to reach out to me with the knowledge of being a former AG on how we can better serve his agenda, and that's what we want to do.
Well, one of his agenda items was immigration, being tougher on sanctuary cities. A lot of people kind of give him a hard time saying we don't have any sanctuary cities in South Carolina, but he wants to see the law get tougher because there is some law in the books about enforcing that. What do you see about sanctuary cities and immigration in South Carolina? Is that an issue that needs to be addressed?
Well, you know, it's not an issue until it is, and you've got to draw a line in the sand and say what you will and will not allow. And people say, well, it's not a problem right now, so why are you talking about it? Well, it could become a problem in the future. So we want to draw a line in the sand and say we're going to enforce the rule of law and not allow this to come to be.
And I'm talking with Attorney General Alan Wilson. We're still awaiting some of his election results as we are here in Columbia at the Republican Watch Party. I'm Gavin Jackson. We'll send it back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you, Gavin. Gentlemen, one thing that is fairly clear to us is that South Carolina remains a red state. The Democrats have probably brought forth more candidates in a lot of races than they had in the past. There are very few that are blank slates and only Republican candidates, attractive candidates. James Smith and Mandy Powers-Norrell presented themselves well in the debates that we held and all that, but didn't really raise the bar for Democrats.
It's got to be disappointing for South Carolina Democrats. I mean, they do start these races with in the hole a little bit. There are more people who say they're Republicans in South Carolina than Democrats. The economy is doing fairly well in South Carolina, so that makes it difficult for the opposition party. But this big debate nationally that's going on is, if Democrats want to win, do they try to expand the electorate and put a progressive person in, a little bit more like what's going on with Stacey Abrams in Georgia, or do you get somebody who's more moderate, who can reach out to independent voters, maybe win back some of those Reagan Democrats who have pretty much gone Republican now? And so, you know, maybe South Carolina Democrats need to rethink that. Is there a candidate who can expand the electorate, bring new people in? Because again, you know, you had somebody who was in the middle, who had military experience, who was pro-Second Amendment, who ran a fairly good campaign, had an articulate and thoughtful lieutenant governor as a running mate, candidate as a running mate, and it's going to be, it looks like a very, you know, a pretty substantial defeat. We want to see the final numbers, but obviously the AP's called it, and right now it looks like it's you know, not as close as I maybe expected it to be.
One of the things, Gibbs, that I sensed was we didn't see a lot of the James Smith campaign.
Right.
And my sense was, well, maybe he's campaigning more down in the low country where you are and in upstate, because that's not Democratic strongholds, either one of those. And I'm not absolutely certain of that, but it seemed every time I saw a tweet or an article, it was there, not here. But he didn't swing a lot of votes in those bands of the state.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they campaigned hard. They seemed to make a lot of appearances. I think that they could have been on the air more. I think they could have done more commercials. I mean, we saw some, but I think there was an opportunity to do more of that. They had the 2 debates, but there wasn't 8 to 10 debates or something like that. But yeah, I just think that Democrats need to go back. They need to have a postmortem. They need to try to figure out what is our best strategy moving forward, because only one member of the House delegation is a Democrat. No statewide officials are Democrats right now. Neither U.S. senators are Democrats, and so it's a pretty bleak day for Democrats in South Carolina.
Todd, can you draw a scenario that works for them?
I think it's interesting, because I think the Smith campaign did try to sort of capitalize on this notion of the Year of the Woman. I think, having Mandy Norell as a running mate. Likewise, I know the Smith campaign actually did try to expand the electorate to the degree that they were targeting women who had voted in a previous election, but not the last election.
She was more of a visible running mate than was Pamela Evett.
She certainly was. She certainly was. And I think both her appeal and I think them sort of saying, well, okay, in what ways can we think about the issue? Like, for instance, gun reform being an issue that they thought might play to, some degree of suburban moms. So maybe the national strategy is still very much in question here in South Carolina, and you have to tailor something more specific to South Carolina. But I do think Smith was trying to think about, how might we target women voters as a basis for turning the state blue.
The national strategy for South Carolina will be the presidential candidates who are already coming here.
That's right. That's
for 2020.
That's right.
But that's an entirely different piece.
Yes.
That's less about South Carolina than it is about who gets to capture the nominations for 2020.
Yeah, well, and I think South Carolina will still, of course, play that prominent role in terms of minority or African American voter turnout. I'd like to also sort of see these numbers. I think what occurred is there may have been a blue wave that met a bit of a red wall, if you will. And so, because particularly if the Republican numbers were just as highly mobilized as were the Democrat, it was essentially a stalemate here in South Carolina.
It's an interesting equation, the blue wave and the red wall. It fits on a bumper sticker. We're anticipating and hoping to hear from Henry McMaster and James Smith. We do not have anything specific at this point. So let's go back to our friends across the studio. Hello, friends across the studio.
Well, hello. Yes. Well, we're still waiting to hear from them on social media as well. Still nothing from McMaster, nothing from Smith, and nothing from Donald Trump either. We are seeing, obviously, that McMaster has been declared the winner. The state putting up a picture of him, 2 thumbs up as he's walking out. So obviously he's beginning to celebrate as well. Sabrina, kind of summarize what we've seen tonight, if you could, what the big stories you've seen online were.
Well, overall, there's been a mix of reactions across the board, especially for Smith and McMaster's race. There's been some congratulatory tweets and then others who are pretty worried. I do think, however, it's been a really good election for women overall. 3 of the most significant things, Ocasio-Cortez could become the youngest ever woman to be elected to Congress. I think NBC has already called that one. And so that's caused a lot of conversation online already in itself. Because some people are saying it makes them proud to be a New Yorker. So, and then in Georgia, Stacey Abrams could become the first African-American woman elected there in the country. And Deb Haaland could also become the first Native American woman in Congress at all. So as far as diversity and female representation, I think we've got a lot this time around.
So even though those are local races, they have some big national appeal, and
Exactly.
we're seeing that even here in South Carolina. Grace, what are you seeing tonight? What's kind of the big takeaway you have?
Yeah, what I'm seeing a lot tonight, I think, is a continuation of what we've been seeing leading up to this race. So, I wasn't seeing too much so far with the race not called, races just now getting called. for our specific races, but people really encouraging each other just to get out and vote. I'm seeing lots of "I voted" stickers, more than I feel like I've ever seen in any race before. And, just kind of that positive message of, it may just be a midterm election, but you can make a difference, get your vote out.
I think that's the same thing I saw. The number of people who did their "I voted" stickers and get out and vote and go do this. It was really kind of a rally on social media this year, and I think that was kind of encouraging to see, for sure. I think the biggest upset of the night, for sure, it's now, gosh, a lot of hours later. It's been 1:56 was Donald Trump's last tweet. 1:56 in the afternoon. He has not spoken at all. We thought we'd certainly see that, which we thought we'd be talking about all night here, what Donald Trump was tweeting about. But Charles, that has not happened. So Grace McKenna, Sabrina Shutters, thank you both. And Charles, back to you.
Thank you, and thanks especially, Sabrina, for bringing us up on some of those national issues. We anticipate joining PBS's national broadcast. We want to stay here until we have heard from James Smith and Henry McMaster. If we can, we believe that James Smith has entered the room over at the Democratic Watch Party. We're keeping an eye close on that. We'll get one of those signals in my ear at some moment and move very swiftly. But in the meantime, gentlemen, what's your major takeaway? Let's start with you, Ted.
Yeah, I think there were no sort of major surprises here in South Carolina. I think that we maintained sort of the Republican control in terms of statewide office, and certainly that's will likely be the same as true in the General Assembly. There might also not be a lot of startling surprises nationwide. There may be that, we'll see. There may be a Democratic-leaning House, and the Senate may lean in the direction of the Republicans, which will be interesting to say, were the polls right or wrong? We've had 2016 in our rearview mirror, and not that far. And so we'll see if, in fact, we revisit this question of the science of polling, and to what degree it really is telling us one way or another.
Well, polls, as we know, are snapshots. They're a sequence of snapshots.
Absolutely.
And they keep going on and on and on. And the polls were not all that far off in 2016. Margin of error.
I'm glad you said that, Charles.
Is always the thing that we tend to overlook. If we see a poll that says Clinton ahead by 3 and she loses by 2,
and the margin of error is 3.
Margin of error is still there.
Right. And I think that's really my point, is that sort of the common perception about, well, the polls were wrong. Well, no, not quite. And you have to really kind of think about, and polls are probabilities, and they can give us a snapshot that's a useful one, but it's only a snapshot.
And they're pretty sophisticated these days.
Very sophisticated.
Gibbs?
Yeah, four quick takeaways. We live in a Republican state. If the economy's doing well, incumbents are going to benefit, and we saw that in South Carolina. I did not see a huge Trump backlash here in the Palmetto State. I think we still may see a little bit of that more nationally. And I think it's a positive sign for democracy that we saw an increase in uptick in turnout. We just need to get more people to engage in the process, to turn out, to educate themselves, to show up at the polls, particularly young folks, because again, if they vote early, they can become lifelong voters.
Good point. And in fact, we don't really know what the Trump backlash was. We know that over the last couple of weeks of the campaign, specifically related to the caravan in Central America moving into Mexico, and the sending of U.S. troops, not Border Patrol, but U.S. troops to the Mexican border, that took over the conversation. It took it away from the economy, it took it away from education, it took it away from healthcare, which is a Democratic strong suit, healthcare. And so Donald Trump really maneuvered the conversation to his issue, which is the immigration issue, which is very resonant with Republicans and conservatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I didn't see a huge Trump backlash necessarily in South Carolina, but nationally, the jury's still out a little bit on how that's all going to settle. But, again, Trump is still, he has more favorability in South Carolina than unfavorability. And it wasn't a state where you could run against Donald Trump and be very successful. Even Joe Cunningham, he would say, I don't like the tone, but it certainly wasn't an anti-Trump campaign.
But we heard a lot of voters say they
Right.
don't like the tone.
Right.
I don't know if it changed their vote.
No, it may not have. In fact, there's some indication from some of the exit polls that a solid majority of voters already had their minds made up quite a while ago. And it does sort of speak to the, sort of the, political polarization that we confront both in the electorate and among leaders. So maybe there wasn't a lot of movement in that regard. Maybe one argument, if one is a bit of a Republican critic of Trump, might have been, well, might we have made even greater gains if we had been able to stay on message in terms of the economy and the tax cut, which was really not discussed that much. Somewhat a bit in here in South Carolina, but not really that much in nationwide races.
Partly because the South Carolina economy has been doing all right.
All right, that's right.
What about the tenor of the campaign here in South Carolina, primarily between the gubernatorial candidates? We had James Smith in our debate saying, we want to fire you. If you were a football coach, you'd be fired at halftime. And was the tenor anything extraordinarily harsh?
I think Smith saw it as it's my debate to lose. And so I have to establish myself. I have to get my name recognition out there. I have to go on the offensive because I've got to make a case that you haven't yet elected this governor and you shouldn't. And so I think that he was probably trying to throw in what he thought were some fair barbs to kind of get the media attention to a degree. And highlight, for instance, the issue around health care. Now, the governor, given a solid sort of majority, can sort of say, my approach was certainly the mandate that the people have given me. But Smith then took that national Democratic issue and said, but what of Medicaid expansion? And he went on the offensive on that. And so, again, I think the tone was a bit sharp, but it almost had to be if he was going to be in the race and stay in the race.
Thoughts on that?
I agree with Professor Shaw here. I think exactly. I think he did what he had to do in the debates. What we didn't see was just a ton of negative commercials. You didn't see Henry McMaster getting bashed over and over again, and they could have gone really negative on television.
Oh, there were quite a few. I mean, there was certainly a component of the commercials on both sides.
Right.
And some of those come from the periphery.
That's right.
That's right.
That are not that you get that arm's length attention.
That's right.
That's not my campaign, but it's very
we're a
much
state that
elected.
has a history, particularly in presidential politics and some of these nominations, of having dirty tricks and bare knuckle politics. This to me didn't strike me.
This is Lee Atwater's
This was
home
not
country,
a Lee. This was not a Lee Atwater type of event. This was not some of the stuff that happened between John McCain and George W. Bush back in the 2000 primary when things got very, very ugly.
Oh yeah.
So again, I think that perhaps Smith could have tried to draw some more contrast with McMaster, but again, it's just so difficult right now for a Democrat to win statewide in South Carolina. It's a real uphill battle. You have to have economic troubles, you have to have a completely dynamic candidate who's well funded, and you have to have some screw ups on the part of the Republicans. We saw Doug Jones won in Alabama, but he ran against a very, very weak and flawed candidate in Roy Moore.
Henry McMaster, I'd like your thoughts on this. To his credit, has had 2 years as the governor, and I don't think you can point to a screw-up that Henry McMaster has made in that span of time. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so. I mean, he's able to, he's handling disasters. He gets to put the cool jacket on with the little logo. I mean, he gets to look very gubernatorial.
He had 2 hurricanes in a row.
He gets 2 hurricanes in a row, which obviously is a huge tragedy and a lot of devastation. But the ability to truly help people and do what, a person in a position of power like that in a leadership role can do. And so I think he did do a good job. And again, like I said, he needs to thank Donald Trump for allowing him to be in that position by picking Nikki Haley and for him to be able to run as an incumbent. And there's a huge incumbency advantage throughout our country. It helps you with name recognition. It helps you with fundraising. You can give addresses as the governor and not just as some candidate trying to be the governor. And so it's definitely an advantage, and it's definitely something that he played very well. And again, he could have screwed up, but he made some really good choices during his time as governor.
There's an irony even with regards to this ballot initiative or the amendment with regards to moving to the governor appointing the superintendent, which doesn't seem like it's going to pass at all. In the sense that given the Smith campaign was pointing out, well, South Carolina is going down in these ratings with regards to schools. And it would have been an interesting sort of contrast that the governor could have made and tried to make the case. I could have improved that. So the one thing that maybe would have given some real criticism about, well, is education improving at the level it should at the local level? The governor's response was rightly, well, had you made me accountable, I could have moved us forward on that. And so in that regard, it's not even quite a criticism that could be leveled at him because he has no control in that regard.
He didn't cast the votes.
That's right.
And there was one moment in the debate that we had in Florence between McMaster and Smith where Governor McMaster was asked how he would provide for something, and he looked down at Hugh Leatherman sitting in the front row, the still President pro tem of the Senate, and by most assessments, the most powerful politician in South Carolina. And Governor McMaster's approach was, well, Hugh, can we give him more money? So that relationship between the governor and the all-powerful legislature continues.
Right.
That doesn't go away.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And so in that regard, the governor still has to maintain the more than symbolic importance of sort of emergency management. But there's a whole range of things, as we know, whether it be the question around the schools or the Treasury that the governor does not have. He's not the constitutional officer for responsibility. And so in that regard, you can't blame him because, in fact, it's not his responsibility. But we'll see if what's to come and what he'll do with this mandate.
Does he have more leverage now to be able to say, I'm now the elected governor, not the accidental governor?
I think so, and I think it perhaps, now that he's got 4 years till he runs again. Even if he wants to run again, he doesn't necessarily.
Which he could.
He could certainly run again, but he doesn't have to worry about a primary right away. And so, he made some vetoes and made some decisions that certainly James Smith and some of his critics said were politically motivated to protect his right flank, some in primaries. And so, perhaps this will, get him more willing to think about some type of bond issue, think about some type of thing that could maybe really move the state forward and be willing to work with the state legislature. Again, that's not something that he did a ton of during his first couple of years here, but it's certainly something that I think could move the state forward.
Yeah, I do think there were some measures that were a little bit more than symbolic that would sort of put the governor clearly in the camp of I'm a strong supporter of President Trump. And so if you were a critic of Trump in South Carolina, you may have been a critic of McMaster, but we can kind of see the polls indicate that there was not a majority in that direction.
Yeah, McMaster's much more popular in South Carolina than Donald Trump is. It looks like from the Winthrop poll and from what's going on today, Trump has about 50% support in South Carolina at best, and McMaster certainly more than that, looks like.
The
today.
Winthrop poll came out in just a few days ago, and it suggested that President Trump is kind of a 50-50 proposition with South Carolinians. Extremely popular still with Republicans. But this is now it's a Henry McMaster win.
That's right.
Buttressed by his support from Donald Trump, but it's not as much a Donald Trump win as it is a McMaster win.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, this is something that he's worked in South Carolina politics for so long, and it has to be a crowning achievement to a long career for both state government and for the Republican Party in South Carolina.
It'll be interesting to see if there's a little bit of delinking from national politics from South Carolina politics. We've got to see sort of how the president will fare in the next 2 years, right? And so McMaster, and again, may have this a little bit more of this mandate on things like we keep bringing up the bond issue, a possibility of using some of the surplus money for building and for infrastructure.
So if what you're saying, if I understand it correctly, is if the president stumbles for whatever reason, Governor McMaster now is elected in his own right.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
right.
less beholden in that regard. We're still waiting for word from both the McMaster Watch Party and the Smith Watch Party as to when we might hear from those two gentlemen, and we hope you'll stay with us. We'd like, after all this conversation, we'd like to hear what they have to say, and Kevin would like to hear what they'd have to tweet. We've got a minute here, Kevin. Anything fresh over there?
I can tell you one thing that's just kind of crossed that I found very interesting. Democrat Jim Glenn, which is a Kentucky state representative race, he beat his opponent DJ Johnson by 1 vote. So when they say every vote counts, they certainly proved that in this Kentucky race for the Kentucky House. Obviously, there's going to be a recount there, but that seems to be dominating the Twitter conversation right now, Charles.
Okay, and it didn't come down to a coin flip.
It did not. It doesn't appear that way.
Or pulling
no.
names out of a hat, which has also happened. We're going to go to Thalicia Edie at the Democratic Watch Party. Thalicia?
Well, Charles, it looks like the race has come to an end for Democratic nominee James Smith and his Lieutenant Governor running mate Mandy Powers-Norrell. Just a little while ago, we've learned that the AP had called the race for our incumbent Republican Governor Henry McMaster here at the Democratic Party headquarters in downtown Columbia. We still have a sizable crowd here, and people are a little disappointed, but just like Columbia Mayor Steve Benjamin said, there are other races, and there were more races than just a governor's race. So there is still some excitement here. We are waiting for Smith and Norrell to come and take the stage and talk with their supporters here. So as soon as we get that information, we'll have that for you. But crowds are still here at 1208 Washington Street. They are a little disappointed, but yet still supportive of all the Democratic candidates on the ticket. Back to you.
And I imagine they want to hear from James Smith as much as the Republicans want to hear from Henry McMaster at that point, as do we, of course, and all of you out there. We're on the cusp of the 2020 campaign. A lot of people say it starts unofficially tomorrow. Some people think it's already started. We had this progression of not only President Trump and Vice President Pence, for that matter, but Joe Biden and a number of other potential Democratic contenders coming to South Carolina, as they tend to do. Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, those are the places that they want to show up to. Test the waters is the expression in political circles, to see if they're able to tread water going into the 2020 campaign. Any early thoughts on that, Todd?
They would be very early. I think in some respect...
We're vamping.
We're vamping here, right? And that's just fine. I think it's going to be intriguing. I think that to what degree the Democratic and Republican candidates are going to really kind of read this House election and the Senate election, or the sort of 2018 election, as an indication of what direction we take. And I think they will read different things. Certainly, Trump's going to be the incumbent, will be the incumbent president. But then what Democrat, if we're talking about the presidential race and coming into South Carolina, is the sort of the new Barack Obama strategy. You build up, you try and expand the electorate, you try and mobilize high numbers of voters, and of course, you for Obama's purpose, you critically try and net aspects of the African American vote, which was critical to Obama's sort of springboarding.
Right, and we don't know whether President Trump will have a challenger. Hold that thought for a moment. We're going to go back to Gavin Jackson for an update from the Republican headquarters.
Yes, Charles, I'm still here at the Republican headquarters at the Hilton in Columbia. Again, a very festive atmosphere. People are getting very excited, especially watching these Senate returns come in. Again, like we noted, the AP called the governor's race for Governor Henry McMaster and his running mate Pamela Evett at 9:35. We're still waiting for them to come and talk, but we did just see a tweet from the governor's chief of staff, Trey Walker, saying that James Smith has conceded the race to Governor McMaster. So that's a major indication. So we're obviously still waiting for James Smith to go speak before his crowd. But, I was reading some tweets from folks like Rob Godfrey, who used to work in Nikki Haley's administration as communications advisor. And he said that, a lot of this race really came down to Henry being Henry and running a campaign that accentuated his talents and his folksiness and his ability to reach people. You know, he did have a very difficult, primary that we saw. There's a lot of money spent in this race as well. This is the most expensive race in the governor's history because of this very expensive primary, and of course the challengers. You saw that runoff race with John Warren in June, which he eventually got over. He won and then faced James Smith here. But, you know, you can't say that Henry McMaster didn't do everything he needed to do, because he did. Obviously, there were some worries that there would not be as much momentum, that James Smith could capitalize on a blue wave. But again, if you look back at that debate transcript from the last two debates, we didn't hear much about Donald Trump at all in either of those. And a lot of the candidates said that race is about these candidates on the ballot, not about Donald Trump. We didn't see James Smith tie a lot of his that rhetoric to Donald Trump. But we did hear from voters today who said that they did want to see a change, and there's still final numbers that have to come in for this race. You know, Governor McMaster, we still need to see those final numbers come in. You know, when we look at 2010 for Nikki Haley's first bid against Vincent Shaheen, that was a close race with about 4%. In 2014, that race was called at 7:01 p.m., and here we are at 9:35 p.m. So that has to say something about the degree of what this race faced, and of course we have to see those final numbers. Like again, Nikki Haley beat Vincent Shaheen, the Democrat, in 2014 by 15 percentage points. What the final vote total is going to be tonight is still to be determined, but send it back to you guys in the studio.
Good recap, Gavin, on what we have seen transpiring here over the last 6-7 months, starting with the primary season and then on through the general election. And it's not that we didn't ask about President Trump in those debates, but I think, Gavin, you make a good point in terms of the election here. Yes, Henry McMaster was one of the first people to endorse Donald Trump when he ran for president, and certainly has reaped some reward from that in this succession of Trump to Nikki Haley to Henry McMaster. But I think Gavin makes a good point in that in the end this was Henry's to win or lose. Get that sense?
That's exactly right. I mean, again, he had not just a couple days or a couple weeks, but he had a year and a half, 2 years to serve as governor, and he was able to use the power of the governorship to get his name out, to do things that kept him in the headlines, to help raise money. I mean, it was just, he really benefited, but he also did good work with that opportunity. He didn't have any big screw-ups or big gaffes as governor. No big scandals, nothing that really would take him out.
I asked Todd to take that great leap from tonight till tomorrow on the start of the 2020 campaign.
Yeah.
Thoughts on 2020?
Yeah, so I'm actually working on a book on the South Carolina primaries.
Go plug your book, Gibbs.
It's very early. It's not published anywhere, but I am working on it with a colleague of mine, Jordan Ragusa, and it's really interesting. Republican primary, they're both first in the South, but for Republicans, it's so critical. It's correctly predicted the winner in all cases except for 2012 with Newt Gingrich, and so it's a must-win for Republicans. Iowa and New Hampshire often split, and South Carolina is really the tiebreaker. On the Democratic side, Todd mentioned something. I mean, it's the first state that brings a substantial portion of African Americans to the polls, and Iowa and New Hampshire, not very diverse states racially, and so it's critical to see how Democratic candidates are going to do with South Carolina's African American voters, who make up 50-60% of the people who turn out in that primary. So it's critically important, South Carolina. It's not surprising that Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and again, it's not unprecedented that an incumbent could get a challenge. In 1992, George H.W. Bush got a challenge from Pat Robertson, and so Pat Buchanan, exactly. Mm-hmm. So Pat Buchanan. So it is certainly possible that Trump would have to come back to South Carolina and campaign in South Carolina if he decides to run, and if he is challenged in the primary in any way. But again, we're going to see a lot of people in South Carolina. We're very lucky our state has played such an important role in presidential politics, and it's all going to start. It's already started.
Okay, and after we're deluged with ads in the early days of 2020, will you still say we are?
I love it. I personally love it. I love this stuff.
The three of us thrive on
That's right.
this.
No, that's exactly right.
But not everyone else does
That's
necessarily. But I hear you saying that at least in this cycle, it's a more important state for the Democrats than the Republicans.
I think so, exactly. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, Democrats, if you go back to, since it's been a primary, 2004, John Edwards is the winner and doesn't win, but it's been pretty predictive. It helped launch Barack Obama. It helped launch Hillary Clinton. Again, it comes before these other southern states that are kind of bunched up afterwards. It's a pretty good barometer of what's going to happen in those states as well. And so for all those reasons, if a Democrat, it's going to be the road to the Democratic nomination is going to come through South Carolina. It's very hard to envision a scenario where a Democrat does poorly here, doesn't win, and ends up getting the nomination. So that's why they're here early, and maybe we'll see some more.
Okay.
Joe Biden says he's going to decide in January. So
We're going right now straight to Democratic Party headquarters for this evening.
Can you help me with this? How do I get it down?
It comes from my old days in the root doctors. I know how to operate these things.
Thank you. Hey, y'all.
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
Thank y'all. We look out over this, and I think a prevailing emotion is really overwhelming gratitude. We want to thank the hundreds of thousands of South Carolinians who shared our optimistic and hopeful vision for this state. And I want to personally thank my family, my children, Teddy and Emma, who've given up their mama for the past year. Haven't been there to help with homework or evening meals or nighttime talks, but they believed in the vision that we had for South Carolina. And Mitch, my best friend of the past 28 years, my husband and my rock. Y'all, after a day on the trail, this man would bring me dinner in bed. And yeah. And he would make me raisin toast and coffee and put it in my pickup truck in the morning before I left for the campaign at 7 o'clock. And I wasn't around to help make a living or be the partner in life that most people are used to, and he handled it all, and that's because they believe in the cause. And to James's family, Kirkland, Emerson, and Dylan, Thomas, Paul, Shannon, Jim, Nina, and Martha, what a great family. For me personally, one of the greatest blessings of this campaign has been getting to know James's family. And you know, our vision for South Carolina has been shared by so many amazing volunteers who picked us up when we were exhausted and probably didn't even know that they were doing that, who gave us the energy to push harder when we thought we had given it everything we had. Volunteers, you inspired us every single day. And the staff, the loyal, visionary, brilliant staff of this campaign has been absolutely amazing. Our friends, yes. Both old and new friends, and friends that we know in real life, and friends who just picked us up on social media at the end of an exhausting day, who encouraged us every single day. We want to thank y'all.
Yes, we do.
And our opponents, Our opponents who ran a good issues-based campaign, who are not our enemies, they're just people who have a very different vision for South Carolina than we do, and we thank them for that. And I want to thank James Smith for asking me to be his partner in this journey, a journey that has taken us to all parts of South Carolina, to all 46 counties, to small towns that are the heartbeat of our beautiful state, connecting with amazing people and hearing their stories. I'm proud to have run this race with James because in everything he does, he is courageous. Yes. And in that courage, James is a role model for all South Carolinians. A quote that I often used about James when I would do surrogate for him in the primaries was the man in the arena quote. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or how the doer of deeds could have done them differently. It is the man who is actually in the arena, the man whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and at worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place will never be with the cold, timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. And James has been daring greatly his entire life, from resigning his officer's commission to enlist for combat duty in Afghanistan, to serving in the minority party in the General Assembly for the past 22 years and fighting every single battle and winning more than he was supposed to. James Smith believes in South Carolina. He believes in all that we are, and he believes in all that we can be. And y'all, that vision remains alive. Nelson Mandela said, "Don't judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." And the sun will come up tomorrow, and we will all get back up and continue fighting for the South Carolina that does not yet exist, but that we all know is possible. And we know that you will join us in that. And I am so proud to present to you the most courageous man I've ever known, my friend and my amazing partner in this race, James Smith.
Man, I'm ready to do this again. Yeah, I'm telling you. Actually, no, not yet. But I'm fired up, though, my friends. I know this. This was a worthy effort. And I can't thank you all enough for being with me on this. And we are not done. But it's good to be with you all, and I tell you, I could not have had this experience and traveled as far as we have done without the best running mate you could ever imagine. And Mandy, thank you. I always said she could be governor, and a great governor for South Carolina. I know this. But it It's good to be with you all and to have an opportunity to say thank you. Thank you to so many who have committed so much in this effort. And my wife and my family, we are so grateful for the efforts that were made. And what has happened is nothing short of amazing. I have some special guests here, although everyone here is very special. My team from Afghanistan, these men, we have not been together since our feet stood on the earth. This is Team Viper.
Hey, how you doing, I told you we were politics.
I got some of these guys. These guys were with me last time we were all together. We were a long, long, long way from here. So I'll introduce them to you real quick. This is Reaper, Gianelli, Cooter, my medic who got very busy, did great work. Bogey, Stephen Bogartis, my driver, great American. This is Thumper, he handled the Mark 19 and is a great American. Smithers. My man. Horace is my interpreter from Afghanistan. Have not seen him since we were in country. This is Jennifer and Kaylin, her daughter, and that is Jamie Ulrich, Ricky Bobby, who was one of my drivers, who is no longer with us.
You ain't
gave us
first class.
That's right.
Ricky Bobby.
But God bless them. And Fergie, John Ferguson, or Lollipop as we call him, is the very best. These guys are the best. They live, and I still stand in awe of the courage that they shown every day. And it was really part of what compelled me and my family in this race, that it was never, never about us and our future. It was always about the people of our state and their future, because that's who we serve, right? We know the difference between leaders who are there for us and leaders who are looking out for their own political futures. And we deserve better than that in South Carolina. We do. These guys set the example every day, and they come here. It's the first time we've been together in over 10 years, all in the same place. And they come here from places like New York and Florida and Gaffney. You know it, exactly right. But from all parts in between. But I'm so thankful that they're here, and their presence gives me a great deal of strength, and I thank them so very much. I know this too. None of this could be possible without my very best friend in life and my childhood sweetheart, and someone who's been with me through so much, my dear wife, Kirkland. And while I don't have all of the kids here, I've got my son Emerson, and my son Paul, and my daughter Shannon, my mother-in-law Martha Thomas, and my father and mother Jim and Nina Smith, who have been rocks for me. And we had the best volunteers in the world. My goodness, I'm telling you. The thousands and thousands of hours that were committed. And let me tell you, we thought we might write a few postcards, and y'all wrote over 130,000 postcards and given us an incredible effort. And I have to say this campaign from the very beginning was powered by the people of South Carolina. All walks of life, all corners, from all means. And you just have to look at the reports. We had almost 4 times the individual donors than what Henry had on his campaign. And they had our donations, average donations were only 1/10 what they had. 45% of his was from corporations and 25% of it was from out of state. 95% of our donations were from all 46 counties here in this state and individuals, hardworking South Carolinians. The very best. And the staff, the team that we put together. I am so thankful for all of the team involved in this. Scott Hogan, who joined us, and Scott, thank you very much. I got to say, the guy who's been with me the longest, Scott Hereford, who's with me in the morning and all late at night. But truly the best team that put together a heck of a campaign, and I'm so thankful for all of their efforts. And I also want to have a moment to just say a little bit about, I got off the phone with the governor, and I had a very good conversation with him. I congratulated him on his victory. I wished him the very best in his next 4 years and pledged that I and everybody I knew will do our best efforts to see South Carolina forward and to focus on the things that we know that matter to the people of our state. Because this work is not done, my friends. We've got a lot of work to do. And this is the reality. What was so important about this effort is we were going to tell the truth to the people of our state, because that's what they deserve. They deserve authentic leadership that says, you know what, this is the place we love and the people, and we're not going to take anyone for granted, and we know you can't move South Carolina forward if you're not willing to bring everybody along. But to do that, we had to make some changes, because I know we're better than 50th in anything when it comes to educating our kids, right? And we have to have a plan. And we know we were going to do what needed to do to protect the dignity and rights of every human being and every citizen of our state. And it didn't matter who you love or who you prayed to, but you are a first-class citizen in South Carolina. No one second. We still have work to do to make sure we pass things like hate crimes and workplace freedom and to build the South Carolina that reflects our values. That work has to go on, and we must do it. And we know this. All of the efforts that we have made to deliver on health care, still hundreds of thousands of our citizens will be living without access to a doctor when they get sick. We are not done yet, my friends. We cannot let these folks down. The work that we did going through all 46 counties and meeting folks that every day have a challenge to pay their rent, to buy food, to pay the utility bills, they need leadership. They need a governor that's going to be there fighting for them. And I know we're all going to do these things. I know in these 4 years we're going to work to make sure that they're held accountable and that we focus on these things and get this work done. This has been a great, wonderful privilege to be the Democratic nominee for governor of the great state of South Carolina, and I couldn't do it without y'all here. And to all of the young people that have been involved in this campaign and have participated, you guys, let me tell you, you are the future. And now more than ever, we need your engagement in what's going to happen, because it is all about the future that we want. The South Carolina that does not quite yet exist, but we know can be there. And so take heart. Take heart and see the kind of efforts that were made now and the volunteers that came together and the donations. You know, we actually outraised Henry last quarter. We did that. So it can be done. It is not impossible. The opportunity is still there for the right person at the right time to step forward, and we need South Carolinians, we need Democrats to get together, to come together and focus on the future and gather support that's going to help build a brighter South Carolina for the next generation. Because I know this, my parents taught me this. James, we have to do... We have to do this. All of us have to do this. We have to do everything we can to leave South Carolina better than we found it. We made great strides in doing that this time and raised issues that were so important that we're going to keep focused on over the next 4 years. God bless you all. God bless South Carolina. Thank you all very much. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
From the Democrats' election night party, James Smith, Mandy Powers-Norrell, Team Viper. James Smith conceding the election to Governor Henry McMaster, now also Governor-elect Henry McMaster, which sets the stage for us to join Pam Evett and Governor McMaster. I think that's the next people we're likely to see here.
Are you ready to celebrate another Republican clean sweep statewide? Well, then with that, let's hear now from someone who is getting ready to become, actually has become, the first female Republican Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina, Pamela Evett.
Thank you. Whew. What a night, isn't it, South Carolina? Thank you all for being here tonight. Thanks to all of our supporters who have given us their unending support and enthusiasm through this entire campaign. I want to thank you, South Carolina, for changing the course of my life. You've also changed the course of history by making me the first female Republican Lieutenant Governor in South Carolina. I want to take a moment and thank some people who have been such a big part of my life before this campaign, during it, and throughout. First and foremost, I want to thank God. God has always been able to dream a bigger dream for me than I could dream for myself. He's walked by my side through good times and bad, and through challenges. He's always been there. I want to thank my wonderful family, my husband David, who has really put in the time at home, at our business. He has spent day and night driving me across our great state so he could be by my side through this campaign. To my children, Amanda, Joseph, and Jackson. They never doubted for a moment that we'd be on this stage making this speech tonight. To my mother, Jenny. She has been my biggest cheerleader through life and the best example a daughter could ever have. To my brothers, Jimmy and Bobby, 2 of them are here tonight. Being the youngest with 3 older brothers, they taught me to be tough, and they also told me that there is nothing I could never accomplish with determination. To my best friends, Sonia and Megan. They have traveled with me all over this state. They have done everything and been by my side. And to all my other friends, you know who you are, sending me texts and emails and making me laugh through this entire campaign. I could have done it without all of you. And to my dad, who I know is looking down at me from heaven today, and I hope I've made you proud. He taught me the importance of working hard, doing good, and aiming higher. And that's what I intend to do every day for you, South Carolina, as your Lieutenant Governor. Thank you to our Governor, Henry McMaster, and our First Lady, Peggy McMaster. You believed in me, and you asked me to help with this journey. I am confident we are going to make the best team South Carolina could want, and I look forward to working with you. To all my people at QBS, my team leaders, and everybody that works for me, thank you so much for stepping up while I've been campaigning. You've done a wonderful job. As I said the day of my announcement, I understand and I will never lose sight of the fact that you, South Carolina, the power belongs to you, the people of this great state. I vow to bring all the energy, passion, and knowledge that I've known in building my business to Columbia with me. Together, we can make a real difference and leave this beautiful state we love so much better than we found it, for ourselves, for our children, and for our grandchildren. I am incredibly honored to be your Lieutenant Governor, and I assure you I will never forget who I work for. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless the great state of South Carolina. And without further ado, I'm bringing up your governor and my governor for the next 4 years, Governor Henry McMaster.
Okay then. Is everybody happy? How does it feel to win all over South Carolina? Who these people standing here with me? Y'all know Peggy, my bride Peggy? Our daughter Mary Rogers and her fiancé Sam Huskovitz from California of all places. And Henry D. and his lovely bride, Virginia. All right, then. Well, I want you to take one more good look at the best lieutenant governor we will ever have, right there. That's it, right there. All right. I tell you, we haven't seen anything like this. This could be great to have a governor and lieutenant governor working together, side by side, backed up by great families, backed up by great people, in the greatest state in the whole world. And I say that from someone who's spoken to people coming from around the world to invest billions of dollars, looking for a safe place to invest their fortunes, their company's fortunes, their stockholders' fortunes, their own fortunes. And they come into South Carolina. And there are a lot of reasons, but they tell me the overriding one. They say we come to South Carolina from all over the world for 3 reasons. The people, the people, the people of South Carolina. I am proud of the people of South Carolina, and everywhere I go as your governor, I know I must stand 2 or 3 inches a little bit taller just because I'm so proud to be representing the people of South Carolina, and I'm thrilled to have the chance to do it for 4 more years. Y'all listen up now. Your support and confidence is truly humbling and inspirational. I can't tell you how thrilling it is to be here tonight with you and others around the state that gave us such a vote of confidence and support. That is a thrill, and that means that good things, even better things, are on the way for South Carolina. South Carolina is the greatest place in the world, and we have come far, but we are just getting started good yet, and we're going to keep going. The reason I say that, if you look back at our history, you look where we've gone, you look how we've built the institutions on this great land that God gave us, and all the explorers were just stunned at the richness of the place that we now call South Carolina. And you look at the institutions that we've built, and the ups and the downs, but we up now. And we're going to keep on going up. And here's what we're going to do. With the help of God Almighty, we're going to unleash the greatness, the goodness, and the power of the people of South Carolina. And here's how we'll do it. We're going to educate our children. We're going to safeguard our people and their property. We're going to protect our environment. We're going to build a prosperity unlike any we have ever seen before. That is my promise to you. That is our promise to you. And you can count on it, and we're going to get it done. God bless South Carolina. God bless the United States of America. Hey! How about that? All right. Oh, yeah. Here. I almost forgot. We just tell it, it's great. We are great. And we're going to set a model for the whole country. We do things so right. There are people looking for good examples. We're going to give it to them, too, right here. Let me tell you all this. Let me introduce y'all. We really had a great campaign. And I want to introduce some of the folks that have been leaders in that campaign. The finance leaders, I'd ask them to come up to the stage. Bill Stern, Dan Adams, and Bob Castellani. Are they here? Well, come on up. And I got to say, while we were out campaigning, of course, we had to have someone running the office and being sure things kept going. And let me introduce the great Trey Walker. Trey, Chief of Staff. Yes, sir. All right. Now, here's some folks. This is, and if they will just raise their hand wherever they are and sing out. Our general consultant was Tim Pearson. Managing consultant Scott Farmer. Communications Director Caroline Red Bull Anderegg. Jordan Marsh, Political Director. Megan Fennon, Senior Advisor to Pamela Evitt. Madison Hall, Scheduler. Brad Henry, Finance Team. Caroline Wren, Finance Team. Molly McCarthy, Finance Team. Frampton Morris, Finance Team. If anybody's still got any money, send it on in. We still looking for it. And finally, also the Victory Team. Drew McKissick, of course, is the boss. Then we had Jordan Marsh as the State Director, Mark Benoit from the Midlands, Michael Ray from the Upstate, Logan McVie from the Low Country, Benton Dana from the Pele and the Grand Strand, and Sam Vera of the Piedmont. That's as good as it gets. And y'all, this is as good as it gets. And you can write this down. We're getting better. We're getting stronger. We're going to educate the children. We're going to protect that environment. We're going to have economic growth and prosperity unlike anything we've ever seen. Because we got the best team in the United States. So stay strong and always be proud of South Carolina.
Governor Henry McMaster, now also governor-elect for a full 4-year term, and his running mate, Pamela Evett, over at Republican election night headquarters, wrapping up this campaign for the governor and his running mate. We heard a short while ago from James Smith and his running mate, Mandy Powers-Norrell. Pretty much that's the way we probably would have thought this election would turn out here in South Carolina. Not a lot of surprises, though it has been a very earnest and certainly extensive campaign for all of us who've been covering it. The governor said we are just getting started in a state that he clearly loves and clearly loves serving. That's about it for us, though the count goes on. And the 2020 campaign, if you hadn't noticed or chose not to, is already underway. We'll be joining PBS in Washington for national coverage, where it appears that the Democrats may in fact take control of the U.S. House of Representatives and the Republicans may retain control of the Senate. Before we go, thanks to everyone on this team here this evening: Gavin Jackson, Thalicia Edie, Victoria Hanson, Kevin Hall, Grace McKenna, Sabrina Shutters, Gib Knotts, and Todd Shaw, and for all at SCE-TV and South Carolina Public Radio. Thank you for joining us. I'm Charles Bierbauer.